Test. How is the pitch of my voice? Is it coming through too high or too low? I couldn't even hear me at all. Is it really audible to y'all? Is it really audible to y'all? Yes, it is. I just had to adjust the volume levels. Hello, and welcome to a Super Bunny Hop Poverty Sad stream that's only partially about foot fetishes. Today, we're going to be reading some of the favorite or otherwise worst, as it were, excerpts from Jason Schreier's shocking new expose on Blizzard Entertainment. My name is George Weedman, and I am not suicidal, and I have a cautious disposition towards hazards and accidents. And I am going to be reading to you Play Nice, The Rise, Fall, and Future of Blizzard Entertainment by Jason Schreier. Beginning with the prologue. It's November 3rd, 2023. On a hot Friday in November, tens of thousands of people descended on downtown Anaheim, California, best known as the home of Disneyland. But the crowd hadn't dished out $300 per ticket and flown in from around the world to ride Space Mountain or schmooze with Mickey. They were in Southern California for BlizzCon, a convention dedicated to the video game company Blizzard Entertainment. The idea of a single company hosting a convention might seem bizarre. How much would you pay for tickets to go to the Cigna Expo? But such was the power of Blizzard Entertainment and the games it had created. Fans spent hundreds of hours battling for higher StarCraft ranks and grinded for weeks just to get the perfect Diablo helmet. They played Hearthstone every morning in the bathroom and watched Overwatch short films at night. It was one Blizzard game more than any other that had convinced tens of thousands of people to flock to Anaheim that weekend. World of Warcraft, which had hooked millions of players, inspired countless clones, and changed the way people thought about online gaming forever. Throughout the weekend, attendees walked through the Anaheim Convention Center wearing cloaks and scarfing down massive turkey legs. The air was filled with the scent of stale popcorn and the gritty taste of smoke machines. In one hall, hundreds of fans sat in bleachers to watch top Overwatch players battle in intense 5-on-5 shooting matches. While elsewhere, attendees stood in line to get posters signed by Blizzard developers or challenge Hearthstone designers to duels. They held meetups for their World of Warcraft guilds and hugged friends they hadn't seen for years. A few devoted fans signed up to be inked with tattoos based on art from Diablo, while one provocateur wore a red hat emblazoned with, "Make Azeroth great again!" And then on Sunday at Los Angeles International Airport, a few departing attendees waited for their flights at a gaming lounge called Gameway, where they logged into their World of Warcraft characters to check in with their guilds, knock out quests, and make sure they hadn't missed anything important during the days they were away. Despite the energy, there was something different about this year's BlizzCon. Even as Blizzard's fans and employees celebrated, there were hints that the company's iconic blue frosted logo had lost some of its luster. Thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic, it had been 4 years since the last convention. And over those years, Blizzard had taken a series of PR hits that made some fans wonder if they were celebrating the same company they'd known and loved for decades. There had been an international scandal over freedom of speech, a busted game release, and a set of sexual misconduct allegations that led to a cultural reckoning and the ousting of dozens of Blizzard employees. Perhaps in part due to Blizzard's diminished reputation, BlizzCon 2023 also marked a first for the company in one other ignominious way. It was the first time since 2005 when the convention stated that tickets hadn't sold out. In 1991, when two college students named Alan Adam and Mike Morahaim decided to start a video game company, they couldn't have imagined that one day it would spawn an event like BlizzCon. 30 years later, their little startup had evolved into one of the largest tech companies on the planet, part of a hulking conglomerate called Activision Blizzard that would have been unrecognizable to its young founders. And then in the summer of 2021, California sued the company for sexual misconduct and discrimination, eventually leading to the company's acquisition by Xbox as part of the biggest video game deal of all time. Some of Blizzard's history has been documented over the years, but even the most attentive fans had been left with massive questions along the way. How did Adam and Morhaime transform Blizzard into a video game empire with a sprawling 240,000 square foot campus and billions of dollars in revenue? What are the real stories behind Diablo's tortured development, StarCraft's surge and collapse in South Korea, and the high-profile cancellation of a project codenamed Titan? And then there was the boardroom drama. How did Blizzard become Activision Blizzard? Why did Morhaime leave to start a new company after 2 decades as Blizzard's president? What role did Activision Blizzard CEO Bobby Kotick play in Morheime's departure and in the company's cultural problems? How did a company as beloved as Blizzard, one that would drive countless men and women to line up for hours just to watch its developers talk about their next games, get entangled in a misconduct lawsuit of unprecedented magnitude? This book will answer those questions and many more, detailing Blizzard's history, its culture, and what working there was really like. It's a story of unbelievable run-of-hit games, a group of young men getting rich really fast, a hostile corporate takeover, and a culture that left many of its employees with complicated and contradictory feelings. And this is also a story about money, power, and the hunt for never-ending growth. The 33-year saga documented in this book is based mostly on interviews with more than 350 people. Damn! That's a lot! That's on a whole different scale than, any other piece of game journalism I've ever cracked into. Interviews with more than 350 people, current and former Blizzard employees, current and former Activision employees, and other people in the company's orbit, such as game makers who worked alongside or competed with Blizzard. Some executives and developers agreed to speak or participate in the fact-checking process only under condition of anonymity. Blizzard declined to comment on the record. This book does not recreate dialogue or fictionalized scenes. Except when otherwise noted, every quote in the book was said directly to me. On that BlizzCon Friday, Xbox boss Phil Spencer took the stage during the opening ceremony, declaring that, quote, "Now that Blizzard is part of Xbox, we will nurture the essence of what has made Blizzard unique," end quote. To many observers, it may have seemed like a nice, if toothless, promise from a shiny new corporate suit. But to those who knew what had really been going on at Blizzard over the last decade, the subtext of Spencer's words was thicker than a tauren on leg day. To understand why, we'll have to go back to the very beginning, back before Blizzard was even called Blizzard. It starts, as all good stories do, with Pac-Man. Chapter 1. Management by Chaos. Before he'd even graduated high school, Alan Adham. Before he'd even graduated high school, Alan Adham knew he wanted to make video games. It was Southern California in the 1980s, and gaming was morphing from a curious pastime into a lucrative business. Arcades were booming, cheap home computers like the Commodore 64 were becoming living room centerpieces, and the song Pac-Man Fever was cresting to number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100. During lunch breaks, Adam would head to his local arcade and blast through aliens in games like Asteroids and Space Invaders. At home, he and his brother convinced their dad to buy an Apple II computer, which Adam could use to play games and to create them. Born Aman Adam to Egyptian parents, an engineer and a preschool administrator, he grew obsessed with the way video games functioned and how they made people feel. He'd talk about how gaming would be the new form of entertainment, synonymous with movies and stuff like that, said a college friend. I thought he was smoking dope. To Adam, interactivity made video games capable of evoking an unparalleled adrenaline rush. Instead of just watching something happen, you could actually feel it play out. Through a high school friend, he met Brian Fargo, a hey, that's, the Obsidian Fallout guy. Yeah, keep that in mind. We're crossing paths between a Blizzard founder, and I don't know if Brian Fargo is an Obsidian founder, but that is where he, primarily made his name. This is interesting. So Blizzard founder crossing over with, later on Obsidian Interplay, Fallout superstar Brian Fargo, a charismatic, slightly older programmer who was actually paid to make video games. An absurd concept at the time for a company called Boon. And as another piece of commentary, I'll say that Boone is spelled B-O-O-N-E, just like the companion in Fallout New Vegas. And I didn't know that. If you never knew that, now you know. The companion in Fallout New Vegas, I think he might have been named after a town. He might be named after a town or Brian Fargo's earlier company called Boone. Fargo, recognizing a smart, ambitious teenager, recruited Adam to do playtesting. "He always seemed like a really sharp kid, but he didn't act like a kid," said Fargo. In 1983, Fargo and a small group of colleagues left Boone to form a startup called Interplay Productions, and soon they were making waves in the industry with games like The Bard's Tale, a fantasy adventure inspired by Fargo's Dungeons & Dragons campaigns. Adam looked at Interplay with admiration and a little envy, wondering if he too could one day start his own company. He kept working with Fargo during the summers as he began attending the University of California, Los Angeles, with hopes of one day making video games that millions of people would play. During his sophomore year at UCLA, Adham designed and programmed his first game, Gunslinger, a rudimentary graphical text adventure set in the Wild West. A small company called Datasoft printed the game and distributed it to stores, where prospective buyers had no idea it had been coded by someone who wasn't yet old enough to legally drink. Gunslinger didn't get much attention, but to Adam it was proof that he could finish and release a video game of his own, a feat which he bragged about to anyone who would listen. One day at the UCLA computer lab, Adam took a seat next to a skinny, curly-haired student named Mike Morhaime. The two men, both bookish and soft-spoken, had shared some classes but hadn't talked much. Adam stepped out of the room, locking his computer before he left. When the computer timed out and unlocked itself a few minutes later, Morhaime decided to prank his seatmate, swinging over and typing in his own password to relock the device. Adam returned, clacked a few letters on the keyboard, and somehow unlocked the computer. Morhaime was stunned and asked Adam just how the heck he pulled that off. It turned out the two young computer geeks had both used the same simple password, Joe, a meet-cute that sparked a lasting friendship. Morhaime, too, obsessed over video games. As a kid, he was fascinated by the insides of machinery, radios, televisions, microwaves. Whenever his family would get new electronics, he'd ignore the hardware and instead pore over the manual, curious to know the exact purpose of each port on the back of the VCR. In middle school, he and his siblings pooled together their savings to buy the Bally Astrocade, a game system that included a cartridge with the basic programming language on it, allowing Morhaime to write simple software and slowly figure out how games functioned. The jolt of excitement from taking things apart and reassembling them pushed him to study electrical engineering at UCLA, where he sat in the front row of every class, asking questions and trying to absorb as much as possible. Their class of programmers was in the hundreds, but Morhaime was among the few who stood out to Adham as the best of the best, the ones who would finish their assignments early and then invent challenges for one another, battling over who could code a successful program in the fewest lines. Adham thought that his fellow software-obsessed geek could be the perfect partner for the grand plan he had been formulating to make the best video game company in the world. And the two men made their way through college in the late 1980s. The video game industry expanded at a rapid pace. The Nintendo Entertainment System, released in 1987, led to groundbreaking games like Super Mario Bros. And The Legend of Zelda. Video games were growing more complex and more lucrative every year. Adham's old pals at Interplay were so successful at making their own games, they also began founding and publishing other companies' titles. I should have said funding and publishing other companies' titles, that is. In 1990, as Adham was finishing his degree, he suggested to Morhaime that they team up and start a video game company. But Morhaime, who had graduated a few months earlier, was reluctant. He'd snagged a job writing test software at Western Digital, a stable computer technology company that offered him a salary and benefits with little risk, and he specialized in hardware, not video game development. Adham persisted, laying out a lengthy case, and even setting up a meeting with Morhaime's skeptical father. As computer engineers in their 20s, Adham argued this was the best possible time to take a risk. If it didn't work out, no big deal. They could all get jobs at IBM or Microsoft. There were very few other industries in which a couple of guys could go into business with a small amount of seed money and make something that hundreds of people would enjoy. It was clear that Adham had a gift for persuasion. "People said he had Jedi powers," said one person who worked with him. "He was always calm, listening, and not aggressive, always unassuming. And then he'd start to talk and you'd get all charged up. 'Yes, I will follow you.'" After some hemming and hawing, Morheim agreed to take the plunge. In February of 1991, the pair founded Silicon and Synapse, meant to represent a sort of synergy between computer parts, silicon, and the human brain, synapse. Each of them invested around $10,000, Adham from his college fund, Morheim through a loan from his grandmother, and they rented out a tiny office in Irvine, California. They couldn't afford new computers, so they brought in the ones they had at home, and Adham recruited one of his other UCLA friends, Frank Pierce, to be their first employee. Addendum. Years later, Pierce would become retconned as a Blizzard co-founder, but at the time he took a salary rather than equity. One photo taken on their very first day showed Adham and Morheim craning their necks and staring down at the camera, pursed lips, matching stubble, looking ready to conquer the world. In 1991, the video game industry was blowing up. Street Fighter II dominated arcades worldwide, Sega and Nintendo battled over living rooms, and Tetris had become a global sensation thanks to its bouncy music and addictive block puzzles. As the money kept pouring in, companies looked to release their games on as many platforms as possible, often hiring outside contractors to help adapt a game from one machine to another. A game originally released for the MS-DOS computer might get a port or conversion to the Super Nintendo or Sega Genesis or Amiga, and more, each developed by a different contractor, packed with new features to distinguish it from the others. Morheim and Adham played into the one-day designs of their own software, but to start, Silicon and Synapse would take on contract work as the company tried to make a name for itself. This was where Adham's relationship with Brian Fargo started to pay dividends. Fargo, who had received a 10% stake in Silicon and Synapse as an advisor, Adham had a 60% and Morheim had 30%, began giving the company a slew of these conversion contracts, starting with the Windows version of Battle Chess, which transformed the rooks and knights into medieval warriors. Silicon and Synapse needed more programmers to keep up with the work, so they called Patrick Wyatt, who was finishing up his final months at UCLA, where he and Morheim had been brothers at Triangle, a fraternity of men who spent most of their time talking about code. Morheim asked if he wanted to make video games, and Wyatt, a computer science major, was intrigued. "I said that sounds like a lot of fun," Wyatt recalled. He started programming on Battle Chess while simultaneously finishing his degree and working on another job on campus. "It was hellacious in a way, but I was doing so much fun stuff," he said. "But it was also really fun!" Soon he had officially joined Silicon and Synapse as an engineer. As the year went on, they kept picking up conversion contracts for Interplay's eclectic suite of products, ranging from a role-playing game based on Lord of the Rings to an educational game that taught players how to type. "They'd fly it past us, and we'd figure out whether we could do it or not," said Wyatt. "At the time, we called it the business plan du jour." Each of these contracts would take a few months at most, and each Silicon and Synapse employee would juggle several at once. "The goal at that point was just to keep alive," said Joy Ray Hall, who joined the company later that year. When they weren't completing for work-for-hire projects, When they weren't completing work-for-hire projects, Silicon and Synapse's employees were fantasizing about the original games they'd one day make. Inspired by Adham's lofty rhetoric, they thought they could conquer the video game industry, not just because they were good programmers, but because they understood video games. The industry's rapid growth had drawn interest from suited businessmen with expertise in spreadsheets and in selling boxes, but not in the products themselves. In contrast, Adham and the crew didn't need focus groups or market research to discern if a game was good. They could just make the games they wanted to play. Adham decided that anyone who didn't play games wasn't welcome at Silicon and Synapse. Prospective employees would be asked their favorite video games, then quizzed extensively to gauge their depth of knowledge. The team would write code in the mornings, battle one another in Magic the Gathering during lunch, and spend evening playing games in the office televisions. James Anhalt, an engineer who had joined from UCLA, shared an apartment with Pierce, who served double duty as a programmer and the office receptionist. "It was 24/7. The people you live with, hang out with, and work with, they were all the same," Anhalt said. There was a constant, humming conversation about which games were good, which were bad, and what they'd all do differently. Interplay was working on a game called RPM Racing, a basic driving simulator in which players steered pastel sports cars and trucks down winding tracks, and the timeline was tight. Nintendo's next console, the Super Nintendo, was planned for that fall, and it was crucial for RPM Racing to arrive alongside it. Fargo called in Silicon and Synapse to help develop the game and was again impressed with the team's efficiency and reliability. "I knew I could count on them, and they came through," he said. Fargo then offered to let Adham pitch his own ideas, and by the end of 1991, Interplay had signed Silicon and Synapse on to make 2 original games for the Super Nintendo. One was a sequel to RPM Racing called, hell yeah, Rock and Roll Racing, that added personality to its predecessor's drab driving. There was heavy metal music, a cast of drivers with names like Cyberhawk and Snake Sanders, and an announcer offering colorful play-by-play commentary. "Let the carnage begin!" The second was The Lost Vikings, a puzzle platformer inspired by the classic strategy game Lemmings, in which players were tasked with keeping dozens of hapless, wandering critters alive by clearing safe passages through tunnels and over lava. But the initial concept, that the player would control dozens or hundreds of tiny little Nordic Vikings, wasn't holding up because the creatures were too small to see on a television. In the future, the video game industry would cultivate a discipline known as game design to solve problems like that. But in the early 1990s, the process was less rigorous. Everyone at Silicon and Synapse was either an artist or a programmer, and Adham would call them all into a room to hammer out the solution. Everybody was allowed to say their piece, said Joy Ray Hall. There was never any animosity about it, just pitch in. What do you think is cool? For the Lost Vikings, they eventually decided to whittle down the number of Vikings to 3, which felt like a good balance. Eric the Swift could run and jump, Balog the Fierce could shoot arrows, and Olaf the Scout had a shield for blocking enemy projectiles and gliding across short distances. The player could only control one at a time, but could switch between them to take down monsters or solve environmental puzzles. All of Silicon and Synapse's employees were men, and these design meetings, fueled by caffeine and testosterone, could get rowdy. Sometimes there was screaming, sometimes there were fistfights. The burgeoning video game industry was still in the early stages of becoming an industry, and a 10-person game-making company like Silicon and Synapse didn't yet have legal or HR people, or even standards for how to operate. They called it management by chaos, finding the best possible option through debate. "We'd sit there and iterate on an issue until everyone was in agreement," said Jesse McReynolds, a programmer who joined later. "We could argue over something for hours and hours." The process worked in large part because Adham was so persuasive, earning him the nickname Velvet Hammer for his understated yet forceful approach. The development of the Lost Vikings would establish design principles that the company would follow for decades to come. Everyone at Silicon and Synapse was tasked with playing the game so they all had a deeper understanding of how it functioned. And when they played too much and lost their sense of objectivity about what worked, they brought in external playtesters. To add levity, they gave the Vikings cartoon-like animations and added cheeky dialogue for when characters died and had to restart. "I'm tired, Eric. We've been through this level too many times. Wake me when we finish it." When The Lost Vikings came out, Adam and a few other employees gathered at a nearby store to watch people play the demo. He was elated when a teenage boy looked over at the arcade stations and went for their game instead. The first level aimed to teach Eric the Swift's jump move by putting Eric next to an electricity pit, and when the boy started playing, he fell in the pit and died. The boy then immediately put down the controller and moved to another kiosk. I just thought, oh my god, we killed this kid 2 seconds into the game, and he's never gonna know what an amazing game this is. Adam later said in a retrospective. The incident convinced him that video game intro sequences needed to be as safe, easy, and approachable as possible. You want your players right from the start to feel heroic and powerful, he said. Death traps aside, both Rock and Roll Racing and The Lost Vikings were critical hits, leading one video game magazine to name Silicon and Synapse Best Software Developer of the Year in 1993. Interplay, which had published both games, was thrilled with the reception and hungry for more. And remember, this is George commentary, how there was there's some kind of connection between early Blizzard, or maybe proto-Blizzard, with Interplay later on through Brian Fargo. Where was I? Haha. They were clearly one of the better developers I worked with, said Interplay producer Alan Pavlish. They understood game design, they worked hard, and they took the time and effort to do that little extra bit that makes a game go from B or a B+ into an A or an A+. Yet the company wasn't making much money off this success. Silicon and Synapse employees didn't earn top salaries or have much in the way of benefits, but even with expenses kept low, Adham and Morheim had trouble keeping up. Neither Rock and Roll Racing nor The Lost Vikings were selling quite as well as they'd hope. Some of the developers blamed that on the marketing, which was beyond their control. As the publisher, Interplay was funding, packaging, and selling most of their games, which also meant keeping the profits. To find real success, Silicon and Synapse would need to publish a game by itself. Stu Rose had grungy long hair, a perennial denim jacket, and dreams of one day becoming a cartoonist. But in the early 1990s, the newspaper industry was failing, and he realized that his dreams of drawing for the daily funny pages might not pan out, so he thought he might try his luck in video games. One night while out with a friend who worked at Silicon and Synapse, Rose met Adam and other members of the team who said they were looking for new artists. "Why didn't my friend say anything?" Rose remembered thinking. Soon after getting his own job at Silicon and Synapse, Rose discovered the answer. Alan Pavlish arrived at the office to look at an expected new build for the Mac conversion of Interplay's Castles, but Rose's friend wasn't at the office. When they looked through his computer, they couldn't find the requisite art anywhere. "Turns out he had not really done much work," said Rose. Excuse me, let me go back. "Turns out he had not really done much work," said Rose. "Alan's face almost went white when he realized." The friend was let go, and Rose took over the project, which he finished in a few weeks, helping prove that he meshed with the other Type A achievers at Silicon and Synapse. Sometime later, Rose was in Adham's office and saw a box from an educational game he had developed at a previous company. "Whoa, that's weird! You have my product on the shelf!" Rose recalled saying. Adam was confused, saying he thought that Rose's friend had made it. "I think he had basically used my portfolio to get the job," said Rose. From that point on, the company formally added a new step to their interview process: live drawing tests. Rose loved the nerdy, congenial atmosphere at Silicon and Synapse. During lunch hours, they'd gather in one of the small office rooms and pull out the Neo Geo or Super Nintendo for office tournaments. One of their big obsessions was Dune 2, a PC game released in December 1992 by the Las Vegas-based developer Westwood Studios. Inspired by the beloved Frank Herbert novel, Dune 2 was one of the first games in a genre that would be called real-time strategy, or RTS. Rather than playing as a single character, you played as an omniscient commander with full view of the battlefield, where you could harvest resources, construct buildings, and train soldiers. Every second, you juggled decisions about where to move your armies, how to spend your money, and what to prioritize. There was just one problem, thought Rose and his colleagues. Dune 2 didn't have a multiplayer mode. At best, the hyper-competitive staff of Silicon and Synapse could argue over strategies and see who had the highest scores, but they couldn't battle one another directly. Everything's better with friends had become one of the company's core philosophies. There was nothing as thrilling as coordinating with a buddy to solve puzzles in The Lost Vikings, or getting to declare that you were the office's best Samurai Showdown player. They all agreed. Dune 2 with multiplayer could be one of the best video games on the planet. At the same time, Alan Adam was thinking up ways to transform the company into an original game publisher. Inspired by a set of Dungeons & Dragons games known as the Gold Box Collection because of their distinct gilded packaging, he envisioned a series with a cohesive look on store shelves. Each game would be loosely connected and take place during a different historical period, such as ancient Rome or the Vietnam War. One of the artists, Sam Didier, whose visions of big beards and giant shoulder pads would help drive the company's distinct art direction, suggested a name: Warcraft. Someone else pitched a high fantasy setting inspired by Lord of the Rings and the Warhammer series of tabletop games, and soon enough they had a game idea. Warcraft, Orcs and Humans would be a copy of Dune 2 with multiplayer and highly polished gameplay, set in a land of swords, spells, and monsters. Pat Wyatt began programming Warcraft, Orcs and Humans in the summer of 1993, as the rest of Silicon and Synapse scrambled to stay alive by taking on as many game contracts as possible. Since there were no artists on the project yet, he started out by copy-pasting all the artwork from Dune 2. Addendum. Later, when Warcraft shipped, Wyatt realized that they'd replaced all of Dune 2's art with their own. They forgot to change the font. They altered it for future versions, but at first the game's text looked identical to Dune 2. So yeah, he said, we owe them a little bit of debt there. He then began devising his own innovations, like a mouse-based shortcut for selecting multiple units so that the player could order them all to move or attack. I was thinking, this player could order them all to move or attack. I was thinking, this is fun all by itself, Wyatt said. At first, he thought there should be no limit on the number of units you could select, but Adham insisted that restrictions would force players to make calculated decisions instead of recruiting a massive number of knights and archers and then hurling them all at the enemy. After a few weeks of company-wide management by chaos sessions, Adham won the argument. Stu Rose then joined Warcraft as the first main artist. He drew the map interface and animations for the game's two races, the Orcs and the Humans, each of which had their own armies and infrastructure. The development process was so unstructured that he was also tasked with naming the heroes and cities. I was just coming up with them in my head, he says. Okay, they're going to a place called Goldshire. Yeah, that's it. Later, Rose provided the voice of the human peasant, a worker minion that could mine for gold, harvest lumber, and construct villages. Work complete, Rose would assure the player in his flat baritone every time a new farm or barracks was finished. Warcraft was coming together nicely, but the company's co-founders were beginning to feel the financial pressure. By the end of 1993, Silicon and Synapse had switched names. Now it was Chaos Studios, alluding to their unique process, and was struggling to pay the bills. Adham and Morheim had been covering payroll for a dozen employees on their credit cards, racking up debt to keep the company afloat. The two founders were tens of thousands of dollars in the hole, so desperate that they were getting cash advances on their Discover cards at the supermarket and then depositing that money into the company's bank account. Although they were nervous, Adham and Morheim didn't see these financial woes as an existential threat. The contracts were still coming in, and it always seemed like they were just a few months away from stability. Sure, they had debt, but at least they hadn't been forced to take out second mortgages or beg Fargo for a loan. It never even occurred to them that it might be time to sell the company. So that is the completion of Chapter 1 as a intriguing introduction. I hate to pull myself away from the continuity of the narrative, but for the sake of time and respecting the audience's curiosity here, we're going to be jumping 6 chapters ahead to Chapter 7, A Boys Club, where I imagine a lot of immature late 90s game developer culture stories are going to be coming out, and they are probably going to be quite embarrassing and uncomfortable to hear about. Before we do that, though, I am going to take a brief break to look at the chat and see if we have any questions. how are the audio levels going on? I'm realizing that this time I have audio ducking set up, so I don't have to worry too hard about adjusting the volume of the music compared to my voice. But on my end, it does sound slightly overpowering. I'm going to bring it down ever so slightly. Additionally, we've been listening to this for about 35 minutes, and I feel that it's time to move on to another track regardless. So, questions and concerns. Let me scroll up and see if I missed any real big important ones. We have cringe, embarrassment by proxy, pointed at that that tweet I introduced us into. M622 says, hey, was a fan of your content back in the day, but you're here now. This should be fun, at least. You know, there has been accusations that Schreier knew all this from the outset and hid it until he was public enough to exploit it. That sounds like an automatically negative assumption coming from the popular anti-journalist bias, because a lot of people don't know that, like, it takes a shitload of time to corroborate facts and also hide it until he was public enough to exploit it. There's also the very extremely similar dynamic going on of how a lot of times you don't want to release your spiciest stories unless you're in a financially stable place where you can afford lawyers. Some of the biggest expenses for publications are almost always going to be the legal department. You don't want to risk a defamation suit or something like that until you are able to, like, have $7,500 or whatever on hand to pay for a lawyer to protect you. Dun dun dun! Oh, thank you so much, my God. Preceding the winter holidays with a blizzard, how appropriate. Thank you very, very much for that, Makars. I'm absolutely positively needed it. Jeez. I've got financial stress going on with property taxes due this week and holidays coming up ahead. Thank you so much for the $20, Anonymous. Maybe we can keep a train going here. I am still chipping away at the absolute bottomless mine that is the Kriegspiel video and trying to, like, I've cut out entire paragraphs about Napoleonic history that are not immediately relevant to game development history, and it's still probably going to be one of the longest videos I've ever done. The longest one I've ever done is about media literacy, and I was able to whip that one up in a far faster timeline from the privilege of already having a journalism education and knowing many of those materials ahead of time. But for this Napoleon video, I'm gonna flash the script on the screen real quickly, actually. I have been suffering, absolutely, positively, there is no denying it anymore. I have been financially suffering from just how ridiculously big and huge of a project this is. We're at a 39-page script. What's the word count here? $25 donation trains go choo choo. Thank you, Trig the Discovery. 17,613 words. If you plugged that into a quick calculator to convert the amount of words written to the how long it would take to speak it, that is over an hour. I hope that when this video comes out, everyone will see that I have not been slacking off, but I've been spending this whole entire year living extremely frugally in poverty and crossing my fingers that sponsorship deals are still going to be there when I finally do finish the video and have it out. So that was a weirdly personally defensive answer to M62's question / allegation slash theory that Schreier knew all this from the outset and hid it until he was public enough to exploit it, question mark. One thing I want to say, the question mark already implies that the anti-journalist conspiracy theory there is not too sure of its own premises. Secondly, I think you guys might know now why a writing professional might want to hold on to something for an extremely long time until there is a period of financial stability with which they can pay lawyers to defend themselves in the event of a defamation suit. This is standard practice for the business. I remember in college raising money to get a campus publication going, because before we could publish anything at all, the people in charge, the other journalist students who were in charge, did want $4,000 to start some kind of legal fund going as the highest priority business expense for a journalistic outlet. The other thing is how incredibly long it can take to corroborate or confirm a fact that everyone has an extremely solid hunch that they know deep down in their heart to be true, but don't have cold hard evidence they could whip up in a courtroom in the event they get sued for defamation to prove that the fact they published was correct. A lot of times you'll hear extremely convincing rumors that you are not allowed to publish until you have evidence, and that can tack on a whole nother year to the process for some other source to come forward and give you something that the other sources could not provide, that would be the smoking gun to confirm the rumor that everyone knows by circumstantial evidence rather than direct evidence. I hope that explains a bit. Let's see what else. Yeah, if we have questions about journalism, because that is kind of a specialty, right? That I could probably shine some light on. It is Adham. I saw that. In my peripheral, I did see this pronunciation note. Right, so he's like Egyptian, so I was like trying to do like some kind of long A vowel sound, like Adham, but when I saw that, I switched to Adham, and we'll keep it there from here on out and try not to embarrass ourselves too much. Oh yeah, and McCarstenson's that was Diablo 2. That was a YouTube video, Diablo Tristan theme music with smooth/gentle rain ambience for 1 hour. I've got a neat little playlist of these that I'm going to be continuing on through the rest of the stream, and that actually gave me a very important idea. I am glad you got the music wrong, McCarston, because I am going to put some text on the screen to clarify that one here. Let's get into OBS, and whoa, no, we're not playing Steam demos. Let's hide that for now and type in something like the chapter I'm about to read. Oh, this is called a boys' club instead of a boys' club. Ba-da-bum. Okay, there we go. I have a little bit of a chapter guide and music credits going, thankfully. That's gonna be important. All right, so we're gonna clear up some confusion over the music. What did I just walk into? Oh, Under the Skin, you walked into the discourse about Blizzard embracing a feet fetish. The current like vibe and culture of what PR and marketing are doing right now with Overwatch 2 is so ridiculously off the tune and the vibes of classic Blizzard. I still like get a whiplash every now and then when I think that that's the same company that made Diablo 2. And then someone just said journalism is complicated. Damn. Right, yes, you can hold on to a story for about a year and not feel comfortable publishing it if you went to journalism school and know how to do it right, because you should not be publishing that until you've crossed all your I's and dotted your T's and doing it right. Um What's the words per minute for and It's Always Sunny, and how does your speech compare? I would imagine it's pretty slower because you have some more quiet time with the visual on screen. There's a lot of messages that can be conveyed to viewers without words at all. Also, when you're doing comedy, you have to slow down every now and then for the punchline to a joke, and you don't got to do that in journalism. Gamers these days can't even read a book without jumping to the juicy parts. I don't know. The sentence is already accurate in the first clause of that. Hobbs gob. Dang, gamers these days can't even read a book. Agreed. Let's just move it right there. Sad truth. Schreier was already laying the foundation for a toxic culture with the fistfights in the office. Foreshadowing. Another thing going on is like someone was saying that he was holding on to all these stories for a year. I don't know about that because I do remember him being the big Blizzard expose guy for a few years, which I would wager means that he felt confident publishing the sexual assault allegations, the biggest elephant in the room that got them in trouble with the state of California, and that some more minor things on the later on down the totem pole, like fist fights in the early 90s. That's something that sounds wild and hard to believe at first blush, but if you hear it from enough people and then like have some kind of dated record from the 90s show up to confirm it, then you're allowed to publish it. But he might have heard stories about that as early as the early 2020s when he was breaking sexual misconduct allegations, but in the context of that moment, that naturally would be the lower levels of the inverted pyramid. Those allegations fly around with Woodward's books about presidential admins. Wait, Woodward. Oh, I'm thinking of the different guy. There are some very popular books about the Trump administration by a journalist that's been I'm about to say a statement that could refer to like 20 different people, but I know that some of the most fun, Fire and Fury, whoever wrote that book apparently does not cross his dot all his I's and cross all his T's, and has gotten a lot of trouble for it, and it is unfortunate because that means that some of the craziest things that everyone associates with the Trump administration might have been exaggerations from staffers who already hated the guy. That's the kind of unfortunate, uncomfortable tension between wanting to get the thing out, but also wanting to be accurate enough to the truth that you will be able to protect yourself in court when questioned on it. Oh, Eldritch T, I actually wanted to be a journalist for a bit as a kid in no small part because of your videos. I will say that definitely the big career advice that I have that you will hear from other people who got into it is to go to school and get your degree in the specialization you want to cover first, and then later on go to a cheaper school and get a cheaper degree for journalism afterwards, and that'll cover your bases. I do not have a Goodreads account. I don't want to feel tempted to sign up for any kind of social network, so I don't think I even want to. Yeah, if I look that up and look into it, it will cause new trains of internal thoughts that I don't really want to entertain. How many of the people at Blizzard are the same people who made Diablo 2? A lot of people move on to other things. Oh gosh. KU Blocks is talking about the Diablo 1 and 2 development process that is talked about in the book. I wonder if we'll get to that. Yeah, I think the Boys Club chapter is going to be covering some late 90s Atlanta-based E3 shenanigans. Would this book have been harder to release during the Microsoft acquisition? I don't think so. No, if anything, that might be a sort of advantageous time to do it because you'd want to do it when their legal department would be hung up with bigger fish to fry, which would be making sure that the acquisition was legal, doing the weeks worth of procedural work required for that. Yeah, I imagine that it took as long to release as it did for reasons of confirming weird little minor things and making sure that Schreier has some extra lawyer money on hand. But I don't think that releasing it during the Microsoft acquisition would have been any more legally dicey than releasing it otherwise, but perhaps more legally strategic because the company's legal departments would have had more important problems to be working on at the time. The main creative minds left shortly after Lord of Destruction due to a bold bluff that did not work out for them. Oh no. You're doing a good job of selling the rest of the book here. I'm intrigued. I don't even think we'll get to that story tonight. I just want to hit you guys with accounts of weird horny game developers being sexist or something. I'm striving more towards being a game dev now, but that does sound like good advice. Why not both? There still is yet to be a truly compelling playable journalism game where the game design could get you to feel like the characters of a real life news story that could be narrated from a place of complete nonfiction with evidence backing things up. Like yeah, picture game design concept that just came in my head when reading your message right now that you might even want to think about, Eldritch T. If you've played a game called Game Dev Story, it's a time management mobile-based strategic time management game about tycoon game. That's a good word for it. Yeah, imagine if you were like playing a tycoon game where every now and then you get text pop-ups describing the story of a real company rising and falling. You would have to get uh various legally sketchy idea perhaps, because if you were making a game that would be depicting the management of said company, you would either have to change the names considerably or get official permission from people not likely to give you that. But if it's for a historical topic or a matter of public enough interest, it the line between nonfiction journalism and game design still has room for some interesting ideas that the AAA industry will never ever even come close to entertaining. But a cool indie game idea is still floating around in the margins of what's been done to some certain extents. Fuck you, yeah, I got someone really excited about a new game idea. I really like the Total War game mods that will give historical pop-ups when you reach some milestone in your grand campaign. Rome to Divide et Impera will give you a news update on what happened in real life in like year 150 BC. And you can glance at this little like newspaper article summary and compare it to what the map looks like on your screen and think to yourself, oh, that's how historically inaccurate the game I'm playing is, with a little window on screen of realistic, verified historical summaries right in front of your face on the same screen. What's your favorite narrative depiction of journalism, fictional or non-fictional, and why is it The Network? It's not The Network. Oh, The Network. I thought you meant The Social Network. I don't quite know if I don't know if I know what The Network is. You know, I don't know if it's my favorite, but when I was a teenager, I did see Good Night and Good Luck with a bunch of friends from high school, and everyone in the friend group thought it was boring and walked out of the theater to go see Memoirs for a Geisha instead. But I'd gone through some things in my childhood that probably gave me a chip on my shoulder for exposing uncomfortable truths about powerful people, and loved it and thought it was great, and might have been inspired. The heroic depiction of Edward R. Murrow may have got me down the financially stressful rabbit hole I'm in right now. But I really think the favorite, and this is such a lame choice, this isn't very interesting. The favorite depiction is going to be, either, never mind, I do have a slightly interesting bend to the story. It's either, and they're almost the same movie by the same director, it's either All the President's Men, which is the uninteresting, boring, lame choice, but my god, do I have fun watching that movie and pointing at it and being like, that's not how it works! But good on you for heroically positively depicting journalism. And then there's also Zodiac, which is like simultaneously a police criminal investigation procedural and also a local newspaper covering the serial killer's crimes procedural. There's a very, very wonderful depiction of the synergy between these two underfunded, spread thin public institutions trying to track down the serial killer, and the word synergy's in my head, synergizing between the two. But yeah, network, I don't know network. I want to say Zodiac. I might have seen Zodiac and Good Night and Good Luck when I was a teenager, and they might have been formative. When I was an adult and already had a few infamous news stories published, I finally got around to seeing All the President's Men, and had a great fun time with that. What other candidates do we have? Fun depictions of journalism in dramatic dramatization or historical fiction. Spotlight's a good one. I don't know Spotlight either. I guess I just haven't seen many of these things. It's funny. I'm a real sucker for digging through old magazines and watching old news reports and scrolling down archives of old newspapers. But when it comes to watching movies or TV shows depicting journalists, dramatizing journalists, I don't know if my dopamine or serotonin really gets as big a hit from watching movies depicting historical journalism as it gets from reading archival pieces of journalism. Fun gift idea for the old people in your family. Old newspapers covering historically important events are not expensive. I remember buying gifts for my family back in the day that were old New York Times magazines that were covering World War One. They were like $10. They printed off millions of those, and a lot of them are found in the attics of dead grandparents being sold by the kids on eBay, who don't necessarily have a whole lot of sentimental value towards them. And since they printed off millions of them, they can cover major historical artifacts or major historical events, but aren't necessarily considered priceless historical artifacts. If you are out of ideas for gift ideas for the older adults in your family, see if you can buy them in an old historical newspaper or news magazine or something. They always get a kick out of it. And before you give it to them, you can read them through yourself if you're anything like me, and have a lot of fun doing that way. So, we're going to move on to Chapter 7 here. A Boys' Club. Hey, thanks for the $5, Ice Cream V. When I worked at a thrift store, somebody donated to us a 9/11 collection of framed newspaper articles and magazines talking about 9/11. None of the staff knew what to do with it. You hang it up on the wall for a few years, and then you put it in a box later on, and then when you die, your survivors sell it on eBay for $10. That's what you do with it. When it becomes more historically interesting later, it don't cross your fingers that you'll make bank on your collection or anything, but you could make some beer money selling a collection of historical publications, and either selling them to gifts for old people or to journalism history, media history nerds like me. But anyways, we were going to move on. We were going to move on to Chapter 7, A Boys' Club, featuring some World of Warcraft music. A little bit anachronistic, I know, but I had a playlist ready, and I'm not ready to deviate from my plans. We're going to be listening to some World of Warcraft tavern ambiance. Let me look at those volume meters and see what it looks like compared to my voice. I think we can bring it up. I think we can bring it up a little bit. Yeah, there we go. How does that sound? The meters are looking nice on my end, but I can't really tell how it sounds on your end. Let's get one Twitch chat message in here saying either a yay or a nay if I need to adjust these volume levels further. World of Warcraft is such a guilty pleasure for me. Not me. I hated it. I got carpal tunnel syndrome for the first time in my life playing World of Warcraft, and look at this curse it gave me forever. Oh, good. Audio's good. When I was a teenager, I was watching these journalism movies and playing World of Warcraft. I was watching Good Night and Good Luck and Zodiac and getting carpal tunnel playing World of Warcraft for 300 hours and not enjoying maybe no more than the first 4 hours of World of Warcraft. All right. Chapter 7, A Boys' Club. The two Blizzards always had one thing in common. They were both made up almost entirely of men. To commemorate Blizzard's 10th anniversary in February of 2001, a couple of years before the catastrophe up north, veteran artist Joy Ray Hall had put together a video about the company's history that encapsulated this atmosphere. A goofy, lighthearted documentary that described the work environment as, thankfully, more like a frat house than a business. You can interpret that sentence in a few different ways. One was as a reflection of Blizzard's freewheeling office, a place where the staff wore t-shirts and flip-flops rather than button-downs and khakis. They played games, formed roller hockey clubs, and sang karaoke on the weekends. Another interpretation involved their status as a video game industry rebel. What that meant was, it's fraternal, said Bill Roper. It's us against them, especially when you look at what was happening in the industry at the time. Big corporations, including CUC and Vivendi, were looking to get into video games because they were lucrative, not because they were fun. Yet the term also conjured up images of booze-soaked couches, testosterone-fueled antics, and hazing ritual. As they developed games like Warcraft and StarCraft, most of Blizzard's staff were in their 20s. They had either just graduated college or had skipped it to come to work at Blizzard. This was a bunch of young guys who were making some money, having a good time, not knowing what to do, said artist Justin Favarat. For most of Blizzard's employees, this was an atmosphere that facilitated success and made them love going to work every day. But for the few women who worked there, or those who might have wanted to, the frat house image was much more complicated. The best-selling PC game of 1996 was Myst. At number 2 was Warcraft 2, with just over 835k copies sold, and it ranked 6. And ranked 6, with 351, 945 sales on CD-ROM, wasn't Command & Conquer and Red Alert or Doom 2, but a game called Barbie Fashion Designer. The unexpected success of this Barbie video game, which allowed players to create doll clothing and even print out their designs, helped kick off a wave of girl games, and disproved the common thesis that only boys like to play on the computer. In subsequent years, new games like The American Girls Premiere, which let players create historical stage plays, and a series of mysteries based on Nancy Drew, also found commercial success for a generation of young women who wanted to inhabit virtual worlds, but didn't care all that much about shooting demons. Behind those games were a handful of female developers, designers, artists, and even programmers who wanted to make games that they enjoyed playing. There were certainly women who played Blizzard's games, but the company made little effort to draw them in. Most of the characters and units of Warcraft and StarCraft were men, and when women did show up in Blizzard games, they were frequently sexualized, like Diablo's bare-breasted succubi. You get the fans you go after, said Mary Kenny, author of the book Gamer Girls, 25 Women Who Built the Video Game Industry. You can make games that appeal to women without having any women on your team, but you can't make games that feel authentic, thoughtful, and reflective of women's experiences without giving them the power to make or break creative designs in production. Some women would trickle into Blizzard over time, starting with office managers in both locations who were often described as the company's den mothers. Others joined to work in sales, marketing, and PR, either directly at Blizzard employees or alongside the company for one of its various corporate owners. By 2000, there were women working in development positions at Blizzard, such as art and quality assurance, but even the utilities reflected in their scarcity. There were 2 bathrooms upstairs. Both men, said designer Chris Zyhert. Later, one person who worked as a hiring manager at Blizzard said that their applications came almost entirely from men, and that the gender imbalance, quote, wasn't a matter of purposeful discrimination, quote. It was true that the world didn't have as many female programmers. In 1984, 37% of computer science majors were women, but by 1995, that percentage had plunged to nearly 25%. An NPR report found that this decline corresponded with the rise of personal computers, which were marketed largely to boys, as well as a glut of films propagating male geek culture, such as Revenge of the Nerds. "A colleague called us unicorns," said Leia Balserman, an engineer who worked on Barbie fashion designer. Balserman, who considered herself to be a casual gamer, said she wouldn't have wanted to work for a company like Blizzard, but even if she had the desire, it might not have been an option. Since the beginning, Blizzard's ethos had been to hire only hardcore gamers, and its interview process reflected that, probing prospective developers on everything from their favorite Street Fighter character to which creatures inhabited the darkness in Zork. The goal was to ensure that all of Blizzard's employees played video games, but it was also one of the main reasons why so many of them looked the same. Some Blizzard executives suggested that they, like their peers at many other video game developers, didn't even consider the ramifications of being a male-heavy studio. "We never sat and thought, are we being inclusive enough? Are we making sure there's enough diversity?" said Bill Roper. "That just wasn't in our young to late 20s vocabulary." But others remembered colleagues saying, half-jokingly, that women would ruin the vibe. Jason Hutchins, a QA tester, recalled days when it felt like they were in a locker room. "Every Friday, people would post pornographic pictures and we would talk about it, vote on the best one," he said. In one instance, a tester took down the office server because, quote, he was trying to see how much porn he could send, quote, said artist David Pursley. Of course, Blizzard wasn't the only video game company that was mostly made up of men. A survey by the International Game Developers Association in 2005 found that just 11.5% of industry workers identify as female. Women who grew up wanting to make games like Barbie Fashion Designer, or Diablo, would have to tolerate this gender imbalance if they wanted to pursue their dreams. Kathy Carter Humphreys liked just about everyone she'd met at Blizzard. She was part of the marketing team at Davidson and Associates, where she helped put together what would become iconic, influential box art for each game. Inspired by the box of an old adventure game called Suspended, which featured a striking image of a white plaster face, Carter Humphreys and the rest of her team leaned toward big, bold imagery. Warcraft and its sequel featured side profiles of snarling orcs and humans, while Diablo drew in buyers with the menacing visage of a horned demon. Carter Humphreys appreciated the artistry at Blizzard, although she sometimes grew frustrated with her colleagues' obstinance. "We'd always had little challenges," she said. They planned to release StarCraft with 3 different box covers, one for each race, and Blizzard's artist wanted to put a cigarette in the Terran Marine's mouth. "We kept sending it back, saying, 'Sorry, Walmart is not going to take that,'" Carter Humphreys recalled. "They'd take it out. Then when we got the final art from them, they'd put it back in, so we had to pay a film house to retouch it out." Carter Humphreys was engaged to one of Blizzard's developers, though she often found herself visiting the company's office. "On an individual basis, I really liked most of the guys I worked with," she said, "but the overall culture was definitely a boys' club." Hazing was a regular part of welcoming new employees at Blizzard, as were Nerf gun fights, dirty jokes, and elaborate pranks. "There was a social pecking order that was enforced regularly," said Pursley. Some developers maintained collections of smashed keyboards and controllers in the offices, relics of competitive video game matches gone awry. These antics weren't uncommon in the video game industry during the late 1990s, but even veteran game developers felt like Blizzard's culture stood out. One night during the development of StarCraft, Persley recalled falling asleep on a couch in the office, waking up in the middle of the night and finding one of the colleagues vomiting in the hallway, having just returned from karaoke. "David, how's it going?" asked the colleague in between heaves. Persley then went upstairs and found a drunk Chris Metzen, who challenged him to a few angry rounds of Samurai Showdown 2. Back downstairs, Persley ran back into the colleague, cleaning up. "Stuff like that happened all the time," Persley said. "No other place was like that, or probably will be again." Metzen, one of the company's biggest partiers, helped drive much of the chaos and testosterone. He was loud, charismatic, and easy to talk to, which made him popular among Blizzard's staff. People loved soaking in his comic book stories and were impressed by his work envisioning iconic characters like Sarah Kerrigan and Grom Hellscream. But his partying could often lead to office mishaps. During an office party the night Blizzard finished StarCraft, he and artist Scott Abayeta were drinking heavily and began to push one another. "We started fucking around like people do," Abayeta said. "Wrestling. It just got a little out of hand." What started as a friendly roughhousing turned into a brawl across multiple rooms What started as friendly roughhousing turned into a brawl across multiple rooms of the office after one shoved the other into a door, breaking it off the hinges. Soon other people got pulled into the fray and someone knocked out Metzen cold. The next day, when they found out what had happened, executives at Blizzard's parent company demanded that both men be fired. "I heard later it was lucky for me that this was with Chris Metzen," said Abayeta. "Had it been any lesser soul, they would have fired us both. But they could not fire Chris, and because they could not fire Chris, they could not fire me." The incident led Blizzard to ban alcohol at the office. For a while, at least. Anyone who worked at Blizzard for more than a few months found that their work and social lives became intertwined. "Everyone I knew at Blizzard became my circle," said Josh Kurtz, a designer. "It became my support structure, my family. I did everything with them." It became clear, especially in later years as the company expanded, that the best way to succeed at Blizzard was to befriend the top employees. Cigarette breaks with executives, barbecues at the founders' houses, and, as the money began rolling in, trips to Vegas strip clubs with the boys. Adam Maxwell, who bounced between various roles at Blizzard, recalled sitting down for his first interview at the company and being shocked when a colleague walked in with a six-pack of beer, which set the tone for his 3-year stint there. "When we did E3s, every night we'd go out and drink all the alcohol we could find," Maxwell said. "You'd hear the stories. Oh, so-and-so was in trouble because he maxed out his credit cards at the strip club. It was absolutely that kind of culture." Once, Maxwell recalled, after hitting a big milestone to finish Diablo, a group of Blizzard staff decided to hop in a car and take the 4-hour drive to Las Vegas, quote, "because none of the strip clubs in Orange County were open, but the ones in Vegas are always open," end quote. These Vegas trips became a company tradition for game launch celebrations and staff bachelor parties. Some of Blizzard's developers considered themselves straight edge and preferred to stick to the arcades and slot machines, while others were big partiers, unwinding from the stressful development of Diablo and StarCraft with tequila shots and lap dances. When the female employees tagged along, many of the male staffers tried to make them feel welcome. "We looked out for each other," said Jeffrey Vaughn, who worked in tech support. "It may have been a boys' club, but at least when I was there, I wouldn't have called it hostile." This party culture wasn't limited to Sin City. The E3 trade show, which normally took place in Los Angeles, spent 97 and 98 in Atlanta, Georgia, where Blizzard staff took the opportunity to patronize some well-known local strip clubs. During one of these excursions, the dancers talked to a group of Blizzard staff into moving into the back room for some private activities. They were then shocked to receive a bill for thousands of dollars per person, which led to some marital strife when they returned home. Melissa Edwards, who worked in business development, said she never felt uncomfortable working at the company. "Yes, it was a bro culture," she said, "but I had a great time in that culture." Edwards enjoyed the work testing games, facilitating logistics, bringing in family and friends on New Year's Day to stuff envelopes full of StarCraft beta discs, and she loved her colleagues. Edwards also dated several Blizzard co-workers, a trend that was growing common thanks to the demanding workload. These relationships were consensual but could set an uncomfortable tone. Up at Blizzard North, a newly divorced Brevik began dating and eventually married a female programmer, which led to tension among their colleagues. Similar situations unfolded at the main Blizzard office, where high-level Blizzard employees would date and even compete over subordinates. Paul Sams, who would become vice president of business development and eventually chief operating officer, dated and later married the company's head of PR. Rob Brittenbecker, who started in technical support before working his way up to director and later vice president, was engaged to one woman at Blizzard and wound up marrying a different one. Not every woman who worked at Blizzard during this period felt safe or respected. Some had to deal with unwanted sexual advancements or worse. One woman, who had joined the Irvine office as a QA tester on Diablo 2, was asked a series of horrifying questions by her manager. What her favorite sexual position was, what color underwear she was wearing, and so on. She had long black hair and was very pretty, said Michelle Elbert, another tester. There was this parade of people coming downstairs to welcome her. The woman left Blizzard after just a few months. As Blizzard's games became more successful, the frat-like behavior of the company's developer had wider effects. Sometimes their antics were harmless, sometimes they were harmful, and sometimes they led the company getting banned from a hotel. In the spring of 2000, Blizzard was riding high. StarCraft was selling millions, Diablo 2 was set to be another big hit, and Warcraft 3 was beginning to get back on track after the big reboot. At the Game Developers Conference in San Jose, California, Blizzard staff were rock stars of the industry, and they took advantage of every open bar they could find. One night, Dwayne Stinnett, one of Blizzard's top artists, drunkenly stumbled back to his hotel with the colleague who was sharing his room. Both felt sick and began to vomit, on the floor, on themselves, on each other. Stinnett's co-worker brought him to the shower, began running water, and started to take off both of their shirts. Stinnett wasn't quite lucid, but when he noticed what was happening, he freaked out. "I was thinking, I don't know what's going on, but I don't want to be here," he said. Shirtless, drunk, and covered in vomit, Stinnett stumbled out of the room and wandered upstairs. "I didn't know what rooms the others were staying in, so I just started knocking on random doors," he said. "Then I passed out in the middle of the hallway." Several Blizzard staff recalled stepping over a half-naked Stinnett and laughing as they returned to their rooms. One pair, pitying him, decided to carry him to their own room, where Stinnett woke up the next day, confused, and, quote, "feeling like shit," end quote. He groggily rode the elevator back down, trying to remember exactly what happened, when a stream of water came rushing in and he noticed firefighters standing outside, the floor completely submerged. "So of course I close the elevator doors and go back to the 4th floor without saying a word," Stinnett said. And later he learned what happened. After Stinnett left the room, his roommate passed out in bed but forgot to turn off the shower, and the drain was clogged with their vomit, so the tub began overflowing. Stinnett's pounding and yelling led a guest to call security, who barged into the hotel room only to find his passed-out roommate. On one of the nightstands was Stinnett's wallet, which was bulging with cash he'd brought for strip clubs that happened to contain a spare copy of his wife's driver's license. "They found a dude's wallet with a girl's ID and a bunch of cash in it," said Stinnett. "They thought he had killed this chick and stolen her money." As security grabbed the roommate and began escorting him downstairs, he managed to spurt out that they were from Blizzard, and an infuriated Morheim was called to the lobby in the middle of the night to explain. Nobody was arrested, but Stinnett's roommate was reprimanded and had to pay for the property damage. Some remembered being told that Blizzard Entertainment would now be permanently banned from the hotel, and the company enacted a new policy: no more sharing rooms on trips. Stinnett flew home with a hangover, a colleague's jacket, and a story he'd go on to share for the rest of his life, one that might have been embarrassing for Blizzard and Morheim, but at the end of the day, didn't lead to anyone getting hurt. "In today's world, we would have been fired on the spot," said Stinnett. "But back then, the reaction was, 'Don't ever do that again, but that was really fucking funny.'" Professionalism would come later. Oh, that was the chapter. Next one's chapter 8, Nomad, but I'm going to be skipping us ahead again to what I thought would be, oh, yes. one of the biggest bugbears for the period of game news that I've been around to cover was the behavior, decisions, and incredibly rude, ridiculously childish, and unprofessional quotes coming from one CEO, Bobby Robert Kotick. We have a 12-page chapter simply called Bobby coming up on page 125. I will use this as another intermission to answer questions and also go to the bathroom in a minute or two. Let's bring the music down a little bit while I take a look at chat and see what's going on. I hate to say it, but I almost expected that one to go worse, because the stuff that came out in the 2021 sexual harassment suit was super duper fucking worse. My god, compared to like stealing your employee's breast milk from the fridge, that seemed, I mean, not great, but at least a little more quaint than I think the more recent news had led me to believe. I'm wondering if standards for human behavior in general have just gone down that far over the 2 decades. In any case, I'm going to run to the bathroom super duper quick. I'll be right back to respond to Twitch chat, and then we're gonna read a whole nother chapter that's gonna be all about Bobby Kotick. I'm really excited about this one. I remember having to write a lot of words about him, and being able to fill in some of the blanks of what I didn't know is going to be a lot of fun for me personally. This guy was a very favorite gamer villain for like 2-3 years back when I started the channel. Oh, yeah, he's famous for going on record saying that games should not be fun because that would not be profitable enough. Some kind of quote like that. Okay, so what have I missed here? Are you sure you weren't on the road to carpal tunnel before? Wow, I might have been. What was I, like 15? Okay, so from 12 to 15, I was primarily living my non-school waking life hours on a computer. And for a number of those years, I was really into modding Jedi Knight, Jedi Outcast games, Jedi Outcast and Jedi Academy, and some other Quake 3 games like Medal of Honor Allied Assault. And that would be tens of hours of more tedious, worse tiny motor movements than what you get playing games. Making games is definitely harder on your fingers than playing games for sure. So I may have been on the road for carpal tunnel before playing those 300 hours of World of Warcraft. So I may have been on the road for WoW. I love the fingerless gloves. You look like a hacker. I'm still wearing the $25 from Muse Mouse. Been a fan since your old MGS videos. Always going to support your work. Thank you so much, Muse Mouse. I'm looking forward to being able to buy groceries and at least making some cursory payments towards my all the debt that I've racked up after this stream. Yeah, okay, it's the end of the month, and I made about $200 from a week and a half worth of streaming that I mostly spent on groceries. Like during a one day this Wednesday, and it wasn't overdraft, but there was the number in my bank account was in the lower levels of the double digits, I'll put it that way. I could never get with any MMOs. It always felt like a single-player RPG, but we're same. The trick has always been to join a guild and have MMO friends, but I'm too much of an antisocial weirdo, or at least used to be when I was a kid, before the bunny hop stuff got going. I was way too much of an antisocial weirdo gamer to have fun playing a more social multiplayer version of MMOs. But you know what? I'm starting to see that this the company culture seemed like it was always tuned to prioritize turning immersive single-player experiences into competitive arcade-like multiplayer experiences by virtue almost of what the person-to-person culture was like. It sounds like they embraced human versus human competition to a primal degree here that is starting to have me stroke my beard and wonder if them being Dune 2 fans but wanting it to have a multiplayer mode might be sort of similar to the progenesis of World of Warcraft. Perhaps a lot of Blizzard employees were Elder Scrolls fans but wanted it to be a multiplayer. And the Super Nintendo games, I don't know how competitive Lost Vikings could get, but Rock and Roll Racing was really fun multiplayer, if I recall right. I hope I'm not thinking of a different isometric racing game, but Diablo is a multiplayer action RPG that's not really truly fun unless you have a group of friends to play with. StarCraft is a highly competitive multiplayer RTS game that you're designed to play forever because there's an infinite skill ceiling. And Warcraft was conceived from day zero as being Dune 2, but with a competitive multiplayer mode attached. So be kind to yourself and to Eddie. Thank you so much, Makars. I certainly will. Yeah. I do not disagree with the statement about World of Warcraft and MMOs in general just kind of seeming like a more boringer version of a single-player RPG, and I do wonder if I'm just, like, incompatible with a certain type of human who seems to be the kind of human they were trying to hire to make these games. Like, the kind of human who's simultaneously a meek, nerdy gamer, but also has a really intense, fiery, competitive spirit coming out every now and then. And I don't think I've ever really been there. The progenitor of Barbie Horse Adventures. Have you ever watched the Working at Valve video from People Make Games? If you thought early Blizzard was anti-DEI, it doesn't sound like early Blizzard was anti-DEI from what I remember of the 90s, and it's not necessarily being contradicted in this book here. No one really cared that much back then. There was no grift. There was no right-wing, crowd-funded, Patreon-funded, YouTube ad-sponsored grift going on in gaming culture. Using the DEI letters is an extreme anachronism when talking about how diversity and social issues of social justice were handled before that kind of language really cropped up in the mid-2010s. it was around. People were aware of it. If you watched old comedies from back in the day, there would always be some very light riffing on like annoying liberals, like constantly correcting everyone for some casual slights, but not like angry, passionately loud personalities leading huge harassment campaigns of thousands of people getting into it. The Democrats were winning elections. The assumption was that it was like fine. It was not that big of a deal, and the world was progressing to a better place with greater racial harmony and sexual tolerance, and that was not a misstep, and that annoying people on their way there was just a small sacrifice to pay for a better future, instead of visualizing an actual fascist future. Yeah, the same terms were not really in play back in the day, even though the same issues were around. The intensity was on a far lower level, which I think kind of corroborates what I was saying about how that was the stories of how the frat bro culture played out in the late 90s seemed lightweight compared to what ended up coming out in the 2020s. There was embarrassing stories of a bunch of boys making video games, growing into men who were still boys, and wasting money at strip clubs, damaging themselves and their company's reputation by getting drunk. And yeah, the women are feeling ostracized and weirded out and somewhat hostile, but not necessarily like they're not getting sexually assaulted. They feel out of place, but I think the chapter did end with some statement like no one was hurt. You know, as a guy, I don't understand the loving tone guys talk about locker rooms. I don't remember them being places worth replicating. Yeah, those guys have better memories of locker rooms than you and I. Recreating the Blizzard magic by encouraging casual alcoholism. So, it sounds like if you wanted to make a really good Blizzard game, you're going to take an existing idea that kind of appeals to a hardcore niche of super duper dedicated immersive single-player computer gamers, and you're going to get a bunch of people who do know their chops at computer game design and love that stuff, but have a more competitive, testosterone-fueled sort of energy to them. You then get those guys violently drunk and make them play competitive video games for a few days that are similar to the idea they're wanting to create. And then when they get sobered up over the next few months, it finally will begin to take shape. These stories have the undertones of disdain for people having more fun than the author. I'm a boring nerd, so people having more fun than me must be, quote, toxic. I don't know, I'm not getting that vibe. I was laughing, it felt like I was laughing with one of those stories when I was laughing out loud. No fun allowed, but also, like, drinking on the job is bad. The stories of the worst alcoholism are coming out during particular parties, not necessarily drinking on the job, it's like, release parties. It was a StarCraft release party that got them banned from the Atlanta hotel, wasn't it? I wonder which hotel. I wonder if it's still around. When in doubt, punch someone in the shoulder and call them a racial slur. Oh, yeah, right. So, okay, this was the late 90s. They were probably tossing around a lot of homophobic racial slurs while having no idea they were even doing it. In the 2010s, they might not even remember doing it. If they were doing it in the 2010s or 20s, though, they totally would have remembered doing it, and it would have come out in the interviews later on. I guess that's an example of, like, the problem happening, but the level of intensity that society was paying to it was on a far lower level to, the result of a weirdly more superficially harmonious or superficially stable feeling society. But then again, I was a kid at the time and might be regarding it with nostalgic biases. On one hand, this was the studio that made WoW. On the other hand, it's the studio that repeatedly failed to make Ghosts. I do want to get to the chapter about Project Titan and how it turns into Overwatch. I'm interested in that one. This kind of writing has me roll my eyes. There are people in charge of making games. Things designed to elicit fun. I don't know if I'm feeling the same grind against fun as you are, but the kind of, I do occasionally roll my eyes at Jason Schreier writing in print, not on web, but on print. I believe there might be some economic dynamics at play that are rewarding him for a lot of superfluous text that us gamers already know about. The books are written for a much more general audience than the stuff he publishes to web. However, the interest in the topics and whatever sort of revelatory details we're going to dig out of it remain on a similar level. So they're like existing in the middle of the Venn diagram between general readers who are interested in journalism and technology, and hardcore gamers who are interested in game history and game business and game development culture. Schreier comes off as a prudish harpy. I'm not getting that vibe. Especially since he's like... Yeah, if he was actually a prudish harpy, I feel like the language would be a hell of a lot more incendiary. Bobby Kotick, the actor from Moneyball. Wait, what? The breast milk heist was leaked because the guy who did it posted about it on fucking 4chan? What an idiot. What a stupid, dumb gamer. Were there enough women to generate these kinds of stories? It sounds like 90s Blizzard filtered them pretty hard. Yes, good question. Acknowledge that there might be a lot of confirmation bias at play determining who's even there to give the interviews to him 20 years later. I don't think I'd be comfortable working for a company where I'd be in danger of errant pornography. I can't imagine being a non-straight white man in that environment. I don't think I would be comfortable either. And I am a pretty vanilla, cis, only slightly bisexual white man. Making maps for Unreal 1 and UT99 was fucked up. Where is Eddie? He's behind me. That is... Putting yourself in the position of not being in control of the gaming experience is such a losing argument the older I get. In the position of not being in control of the gaming experience. Multiplayer video games are designed to funnel and take the brunt of our innate need for violence and war. Take the brunt of our innate need for violence and war. I'm sorry, Ron Cinephile, I love you, but need I remind you of a incredibly complicated 17,000 word narrative I have worked up here that involved the reading of multiple books and multiple podcast series to be in psychological possession at the moment of a incredibly more complicated narrative that's trying very hard not to come out in an annoying way. I don't believe that multiplayer video games are designed to funnel and take the brunt of our innate need for violence and war, nor do I feel that human beings have an innate need for violence and war. It seems like the ubiquity of war is something I find has been exaggerated greatly in a lot of internet commentary through history. The deeper and deeper you research into a topic, the more small little annoying exceptions you find. but at the same time, you can also start developing grand-scale narratives that include very, very long periods of human prehistory where there is no evidence whatsoever that giant-scale warfare was ubiquitous. My strategy battle game narrative is going to actually begin with the fact that the earliest gaming artifacts discovered, that involve a conflict over territorial space. The very first video games that we have on record, not the first, I just said video games. The very first games in the archaeological record cannot even be assumed to be the very first games human beings made. But there is evidence that at the dawn of civilization in Mesopotamia and Egypt, human beings were visualizing their conflicts as foot races rather than wars. The first games that people played on a board competitively depicted races, not battles. For whatever reason, that was the primary conflict of interest for game developers at the edge of prehistory turning into recorded history. It was the conflict depicted in their gaming at the time was a race, not a war. As an example of the ubiquity of warfare being exaggerated and also not necessarily being associated with competitive multiplayer video games. I'll leave it at that. That's the one counterexample to the statement I'll leave right here. I also believe that asking an uninterested woman the color of... Yes! Yes! How did I forget about that one? I also believe that asking an uninterested woman the color of her underwear is close enough to sexual assault to count. Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. I think that's probably the weirdest and most uncomfortable this got. There's a case of a particularly pretty woman showing up and all the boys in the office gathering to gawk at her and treat her so much more special than all the others. There's a case of a woman being very uncomfortable when drunken men are stumbling back into her office during some kind of late night hour in an environment of solitude. Yeah, so it did get there, didn't it? Oh, Call Me Chemical. Call Me Chemical, you wanted to post a link, and unfortunately it got bleeped out. I need to make you a mod for like 10 minutes, and then unmake you a mod, and I will put a big fat notepad reminder on screen so I don't forget to, do that. Try it again. Call Me Chemical. Try to post your link again. How... Sierra and a disgraced cop made the most reactionary game of the 90s. Oh, yeah! What was this? Like Police Quest 3 or something like that? Oh, I've been watching my friend stream COD lately. That's where that came from. Sports! That's two people facing the same direction as opposed to facing each other. A race, that is. Crap, I could have caught that. Yeah, I hope our argument isn't too contentious, Ron Cinephile, but I also hope that citing ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamian racing games as predating competitive strategy board games will at least give you some more positive vision of human nature. I was tabbed out, now I have more power than I know what to do with. Alright. I think I'm all caught up. I'm all caught up on chat. We can move on to the next topic, which is going to be simply called Bobby. Chapter 12. Bobby. And what kind of ambiance would be a good one for this? I had another one in mind for the next musical ambiance I wanted to get to, but I don't know if it's gonna be a good match for a chapter like Bobby Kotick making big business happen. What about Molten Core? I think Molten Core. Yeah. Yeah, we're gonna do Molten Core unless someone suggests something fast that is way better. Thanks for the link. Call me Chemical. If it's Bobby Kotick, put clown music. Okay, never mind. Someone did post a better suggestion. Oh, yes. Yes, I have found us a good one. Chapter 12. Bobby. Robert A. Kotick liked to go by Bobby, a childlike nickname that belied adult sensibilities. In truth, he came out of the womb ready to generate revenue for shareholders. Growing up in Roslyn, New York, Kotick all but learned how free markets function before he could walk. Kotick's mother, a teacher, told a Forbes reporter that she caught him selling one of her ashtrays when he was 3 years old. Jesus Christ. Later, as a curly-haired teenager with an impish smile, Kotick launched business after business, buying items and selling them for slight profits. Wallets, candies, sandwiches, and whatever else he could get his hand on. In high school, he rented out music halls in Manhattan for parties, and hired limos to chauffeur classmates in from Long Island. It didn't matter to Kotick what he was selling, only that he was making money. In 1981, Kotick began studying at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. He had never been a big fan of school and skipped classes to pursue entrepreneurial endeavors. God, He'd never been a big fan of school and skipped classes to pursue entrepreneurial endeavors, much to his lawyer father's dismay. Through a friend, he met Howard Marks, a computer geek from France who was like him in many ways. Although they had distinct hobbies, both were blunt and unafraid to say exactly what they meant. "We clicked nicely," said Marks. "He was very interested in business. I was very interested in computers." The two became roommates, Kotick on the top bunk, Marks on the bottom, and soon began talking about starting a company together. After an initial venture involving electric printers that didn't work out, they devised a new plan. It was clear to Marks that computers were powerful devices capable of changing the world, but they were impenetrable to all but the geekiest programmers, so he planned to design a graphical interface that made the move approachable. Easy enough, Kotick would joke, to be used even by someone as computer illiterate as him. Their new company, Arctronics, would sell the interface as a package containing a word processor, spreadsheets, and other convenient tools. But first they needed seed money, so they called up Kotick's dad, who connected them to a wealthy investor who was willing to meet with the pair. The investor was skeptical. Kotick and Marks were college students with no real experience, and began rattling off a long list of conditions to which they'd have to agree for him to make the investment. That was when Kotick showed him his early negotiating chops. "Bobby stands up and says, 'We're done,'" recalled Marks. "He was so stunned that these young kids stood up to him." Soon enough, another opportunity emerged. One of their friends was headed to Dallas, Texas for an annual fundraiser called the Cattle Baron's Ball. Fuck! These insufferable assholes! Moguls in cowboy hats gathered around to watch live country music and raise money for cancer research. There's their plausible deniability. And Kotick figured he'd tag along to network. To network. Not to enjoy the events or make himself useful, but to network. There he was seated next to the man who would change his life, Steve Wynn, a Las Vegas casino magnate with big hair and a bigger personality, who ran the iconic Golden Nugget and was close friends with the likes of Frank Sinatra. The next day at breakfast, Wynn asked if Kotick wanted to ride to New York on his private jet, an invitation that no ambitious college student would ever decline. On the way, Wynn explained that 2 decades earlier, a Las Vegas banker had become his mentor and given him the investment capital he needed to enter the casino business on the condition that Wynn one day find a young businessman to take under his own wing. Wynn would go on to unlock previously impenetrable doors for Kotick, granting him a social network and access to investment capital. Wynn became Kotick's Sherpa, his rabbi. Like my dad, quote, Kotick would say years later. Thanks to Wynn's subsequent $300,000 investment, Kotick and Marks were able to build Arctronics into a proper company. By 1984, they had more than 20 employees, including Michigan graduate students and even a few professors. Marks handled the software and operations, while Kotick, who dropped out of school... He's lazy, too. While Kotick dropped out of school, ran marketing and met with investors. He wasn't an organized expert, but he's lazy, and he wasn't an organizational expert, but he had natural charisma that could make serious businessmen forget they were talking to a teenager. I think my talent is being able to get things done very quickly, very easily, just by simple negotiation, Kotick said in an interview with PBS at the time. I can go in there and put on a smile and say, I'll be your best friend, I'll play with you every day, and people are more apt to give in to something like that. Arctronics was too small to keep up with the soon-to-be-released Apple Macintosh and Microsoft Windows, and they went out of business shortly afterwards. But the failure only inflamed Kotick's ambitions. He changed the company's name to International Consumer Technologies, looking for new ways to enter the computer industry. He tried to purchase Commodore International, the floundering company behind the Amiga computers. The, quote, wildest of wild ideas, end quote, recalled Marks. But he couldn't convince the board to sell. Instead, Kotick and a group of partners, including Wynn, bought a controlling stake in a licensing company that helped market Nintendo games like The Legend of Zelda. Kotick didn't spend a lot of time playing video games. He'd later say in various interviews that he avoided them due to a, quote, addictive personality, quote. And that, to me, my friends, sounds like utter bullshit. This guy, I highly doubt knows what an addiction is like. But he was fascinated by the burgeoning industry, and in 1990, he and his partners stumbled upon a potentially promising opportunity, a nearly bankrupt video game publisher called Mediagenic that was better known by an older name, Activision. Ooh, there's a kettle starting to boil in my head as I'm reading this. In 1979, a group of programmers at the video game company Atari rebelled against their bosses over what they saw as exploitive work conditions. Then they started a new company whose name came before Atari in the phone book. Activision found quick success with hits like River Raid and Pitfall, but struggled when a wave of imitators began flooding the market with cheap games, causing what would later become known as the Great Console Video Game Crash of '83. Revenue plummeted, the founders departed, and the company downsized. To turn its fortunes around, Activision brought in a new CEO named Bruce Davis, a former lawyer who decided to rename the company Mediagenic and expand it into other areas of software. Within a few years, as the console market bounced back thanks to the Nintendo Entertainment System, a slow and steady recovery seemed possible. But Davis knew there was an existential threat on the horizon, a patent infringement lawsuit filed by Magnavox, maker of the first video game console. Magnavox had pounced on several big video game companies based on a series of broad patents that engineer Ralph Baer had filed in the early 1970s that encompassed just about any electronic sports game, such as Activision's old tennis and ice hockey titles. Incredibly, the courts all ruled in Magnavox's favor, granting some $100 million in judgments and leading top Nintendo executive Howard Lincoln to grumble in one 1989 interview that Magnavox isn't in the business of making video games, They're just in the business of suing people. Davis tried to start settlement conversations with Magnavox's lawyers, but was rebuffed, which he later assumed was so they could get more favorable terms from the significantly larger Nintendo. Magnavox defeated Mediagenic in court and then won again on appeal, and the ruling came down in March 1990. Mediagenic owned a total of $6.6 million in damages and attorney's fees, a death sentence for a company that was already struggling to stay afloat. The ruling set off a chain reaction. Lenders pulled back, customers slashed their orders, and the cash-strapped video game publisher suddenly couldn't pay many of its partners, including an Orange County-based studio called Interplay. "They were very close to putting us out of business," said Brian Fargo, who estimated that Mediagenic stiffed his company out of at least $1 million. For Bobby Kotick, this was an opportunity. He and his partners, including Marks and Wynn, called up one of Mediagenic's biggest investors, a Canadian company, and offered to buy their 25% stake for around $440,000. The price tag suggested that Mediagenic was worth less than $2 million, a staggering plummet for a company that just a few years earlier had generated $158 million in revenue, and they were astonished when the company said yes. "It was a fluke," said Marks. "We didn't know what they would sell." Then Kotick reached out to Davis. "He says, 'I've bought an investment in the company and I'd like to take it over,'" recalled Davis. "I said, 'Well, I don't want to do that right now, but thanks for your interest.'" But Kotick did not relent. With help from Steve Wynn and Wynn's high-paid lawyers, he began what Davis considered a hostile takeover. It wasn't a fair fight," said Davis. "I went to a gunfight with a knife." After some negotiations and the promise of a cash infusion, Davis handed over the keys. And in February 1991, just as Alan Adham and Mike Morhaime were assembling their desks, Bobby Kotick became CEO and chairman of Mediagenic. The company's financials were still a disaster, and salvaging it would be a tough order, but Kotick recognized there was an asset in Mediagenic that Davis had essentially discarded: its old name. Kotick planned to file for bankruptcy, reorganize the company under the Activision brand, and pay off as much debt as possible with equity, transforming creditors into shareholders with vested interest in the company's success. Now they needed to figure out what to do with the Magnavox lawsuit. As Kotick tells the story, he, now 27 years old and a newly minted CEO, walked into a conference room full of executives and lawyers from Philips Electronics, Magnavox's parent, and proposed that they convert their $6.6 million debt into Activision stock as part of the bankruptcy restructuring. Phillips said it wasn't interested, so Kotick took out his office keycard and left it on the conference room table, wishing them luck with their new assets. A few minutes later, by Bobby Kotick's account, Phillips called him back in and accepted the offer. Davis believed that Wynn's influence played a far bigger role than Kotick's negotiating skills, but whatever ultimately swayed the lawyers, Phillips agreed. Kotick filed for bankruptcy, laid off most of the staff, and relocated the company, now again called Activision, from San Francisco to Santa Monica. He re-released classic games in new packages and rebuilt the company from scratch, recruiting people with no video game industry experience, perhaps to get fresh perspectives, or perhaps they couldn't convince experienced game developers to work for them, which meant an office full of architects, lawyers, and engineers right out of college. "It was effectively a startup," said Tim Morton, who joined in 1994. Armed with some $40 million in capital from Wynn and other investors, Kotick set out to return to profitability. One of the company's biggest bets was MechWarrior 2, which would use 3D graphics to create high-speed battles between hulking robots. "There was absolutely no confidence at that time that it was going to be a hit," said Josh Resnick, a Wharton Business School graduate who became a producer on MechWarrior 2. Faced with a tight deadline and significant technological constraints, a small team of artists and engineers scrambled to get the game out the door. "It was a race to the finish," says Resnick. "We went days without sleeping. We lived in the office." MechWarrior 2 shocked the gaming industry by becoming Activision's first smash success since the 1980s, selling 500,000 copies in just 3 months. Kotick liked to reward people who delivered hits. Resnick received a pay bump and was promoted to a management role. "He'd give you a big leash and let you run with it," said Resnick. "If you keep hitting a wall and not performing, he wasn't a sentimental guy. You were done. But if you performed, he gave you the resources and support you needed. Over coffee one day, a colleague named Andrew Goldman approached Resnick with an interesting proposal that they should start their own outfit and develop games externally for Activision. This was a moment when they were very forward-thinking, said Resnick. They could have been pretty emotional, given us a bad deal. Instead, they gave us a very generous transition. Kotick and his team figured that rather than driving entrepreneurial-minded top talent into competing publishers, they should embrace the opportunity. When Goldman and Resnick started their new company, Pandemic Studios, Activision gave them a publishing deal for 2 games. The pair was allowed to bring along furniture, equipment, and even game technology from Activision. We didn't have to raise any money, Resnick said. We were able to stand up as a studio within 5 minutes. But at the last minute, Kotick decided to renegotiate their agreement. At the 11th hour, he said, Hey Josh, I'm gonna feel weird if you guys take off and become a huge success and I don't own a piece of you, Resnick recalled. So as a prerequisite of this deal, I'm gonna take 5% of the company. Kotick wrote a check for $100,000 in exchange for this equity, but Resnick still wasn't thrilled about the last-minute rug pull. Over his tenure, Kotick became known as a demanding but unexpectedly generous type. The type of guy who would both reprimand employees for making typos in emails and surprise them with thoughtful gifts, like secretly paying for their vacations. He was a ruthless competitor and grew obsessed with beating his rivals. He wanted Activision to be the biggest video game publisher in the world, said Keith Moore, one of his early partners. He also had a reputation for being I've always had a problem with this one. Litigious. He likes to litigate. He's good and interested and frequently involved with litigating. He's litigious. He had a reputation for being good at litigating and interested in litigating and doing a lot of litigating, and he could show a vindicative side to people he believed had wronged him. He doesn't shoot, but he points guns, said Marks. There's a tendency to really go aggressive on people. In a PBS documentary aired in 1984, a young Kotick talked about meeting with a company whose executives told him they had entered the software business because it was a load of fun. We're in it for the fun, too, Kotick said, but we're really in it for the money. Oh, wow, he said that. He said that on a television interview, a PBS interview paid by taxpayer dollars in the 1980s. Let's hear that one again. In a PBS documentary aired in 1984, a young Kotick talked about meeting with a company whose executives told him they had entered the software business because it was a lot of fun. Quote, we're in it for the fun, too, Kotick said, but we're really in it for the money, end quote. By 2000, Activision was generating more than $500 million in revenue every year and growing rapidly. Kotick continued investing in internal game developers and acquired the ones that seemed most lucrative, such as Raven Software, the maker of popular shooter games, and Neversoft, the company responsible for the hit Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. He said he believed in letting game companies make their own strategic decisions and maintain their autonomy, in contrast to Electronic Arts, which Kotick described as a hotbed of Death Star culture, due to its tendency to homogenize game development teams. At the same time, Kotick surrounded himself with people who had expertise in selling packaged goods. In contrast to Blizzard, Activision's executives weren't video game fans. They were businessmen who had worked for companies like Procter & Gamble and knew how to sell chocolate and laundry detergent. If you want to run an institutional-level company, having people who know how to run business is in many respects a lot more valuable than having people who know how to make video games, Kotick would later tell a reporter. His strategy was to treat video games like commodities, and when a game like Tony Hawk turned out to be a hit, Kotick would use every possible resource to turn it into a franchise, with regular sequels and spin-offs. Quote, it was made very clear to us, if it did not have an opportunity to be a billion-dollar-plus franchise, don't consider it, end quote, said Dusty Welch, a top Activision executive. Later, Kotick would be vilified for this approach and criticized by players for running franchises into the ground. One comment to investors, which Kotick later said was meant to be a joke, sure, would hang over him for the rest of his career. Quote, "The goal that I had in bringing a lot of the packaged good folks into Activision about 10 years ago," he said, "was to take all the fun out of making video games." End quote. As Kotick's star rose in the video game industry, he schmoozed with just about every other mogul in the business, including an educational software guru named Bob Davidson. The two first met in 1994, shortly after Davidson had spent around $7 million to buy a little-known company called Silicon and Synapse. Quote, "I was thinking it was mind-boggling that he could have spent that much," end quote, Kotick later recalled. More than a decade later, as Kotick began meeting with Vivendi Games CEO Bruce Hack to talk about a potential merger, that $7 million seemed like one of the best investments in business history. The conversation first started in 2006, when the Vivendi executives got in touch with Kotick and asked if he was interested in adding Warcraft to his portfolio of franchises. He and Hack began dining regularly and realized that their two companies complemented one another perfectly. Blizzard was the most revered PC developer in the world, while Activision had dominated the console space. Next up was Morheim, who arranged to meet Kotick at Morton's Steakhouse in Next up was Morheim, who arranged to meet Kotick at Morton's Steakhouse in Casa Mesa, California, right next to Blizzard's offices. In a cavernous private room removed from potential prying eyes, the two spent hours talking about their respective goals and business philosophies. Later, Morheim went back to his executive team and confessed that he had been charmed. Kotick had said all the right things, assuring Morheim that he had no problem with Blizzard's mission to be player first and to refuse released games until they were ready. Kotick promised that he didn't want to damage what made Blizzard such a big success. Morheim told his lieutenants that he thought this would ultimately be a win for them, providing stability after years of turbulence under Vivendi. He saw Activision as an efficient, well-run company with several successful franchises that could help fill out the calendar in case Blizzard had to delay a game. He was also impressed by Kotick's Rolodex of contacts across the world, from politicians to celebrities. Kotick, meanwhile, was enticed by the growing appeal of Blizzard in China, one of the world's largest markets and an untapped audience for most of the video game industry. The deal was in place a year later. Activision would merge with Vivendi's video game unit to form Activision Blizzard. Kotick would become CEO of the entire outfit, while Morheim would be CEO and president of Blizzard. Vivendi would own 52% of the new entity, which was valued at $18.9 billion. It seemed inconceivable, after rescuing Activision from bankruptcy all those years earlier, that Kotick would agree to relinquish control of his company. But the allure of World of Warcraft, which by the end of 2007 was approaching 10 million subscribers, proved too strong for him to resist. He told press at the time that he couldn't figure out how to recreate Blizzard, so instead he would have to acquire it. World of Warcraft was a path to what Kotick appeared to value dearly: steady, predictable revenue growth. Blizzard also gave Kotick access to more franchises with Hollywood potential. A decade earlier, Kotick had reluctantly moved Activision down to Los Angeles because that was where the talent was. Quote, "It sure wasn't for the quality of life," end quote, he told the New York Times in 1993, but in the years that followed, he appeared to grow enamored of the City of Angels. He befriended Hollywood moguls such as DreamWorks CEO Jeffrey Katzenberg, and would later give an unexpectedly compelling performance as a baseball team owner in the movie Moneyball. "I fundamentally believe it was a core driver of Bobby, wanting to be a player in the Hollywood space," said Dusty Welch. Kotick promised that Blizzard would retain its autonomy. In 2008, as the merger closed and he took the seat of the CEO of Activision Blizzard, he said he believed his job was to give each of their subsidiaries the freedom to be creative. Quote, "If you look at any of the studios we have anywhere in the world, they all retain their own culture and identity," he told a reporter. At the same time, observers couldn't help but notice that Kotick's business philosophy seemed to be diametrically opposed to the values that Blizzard had been preaching since the Silicon and Synapse days. Paul Reich, a founder of the game studio Toys for Bob, which Activision acquired in 2005, described it as an explicit divide. "That was really a fundamental, understood concept at Activision," Reich said. "We weren't doing this for the art, for the player first. We were creating a product to make money." Jeez. That's the end of Chapter 12, the Bobby Kotick chapter. That one, jeez. I'm sure that you were hearing the visceral reaction that I was occasionally feeling in that one. I'm gonna run off to the bathroom again. I will be right back to scan over the chat, answer questions, and let's see, 9:53 p.m. We've been going for 18 hours. We do have time. I want to do the chapter about Project Titan and how it got turned into Overwatch. That sounds really adjective. It does not sound fun. It might sound sad, but I don't want to read it to feel sad. It sounds like it will be full of some good, important lessons to learn that we all can use in our daily, everyday lives. Whatever Blizzard learned from having to compile and then cancel a whole bunch of games and then turn them into Overwatch might be something that us struggling creative types can learn from for ourselves. I'll be back in like 60 seconds. Enjoy the clown music. Okay, now I'm back where I must try and enjoy the clown music. Alright, let me scroll up and see what I missed while going through there. Oh, I see a pronunciation guide. Litigious. But then why is the U there? Yeah, there's a U.
Litigious.
Hang on a minute.
Litigious.
That's not how that's spelled. So it's spelled litigious, but it's pronounced litigus. Let me hear that again, actually.
Litigious.
Litigious. But it's pronounced litigious. Don't get hung up on it. Okay, I'll try not to get hung up on it. Litigious, huh. Good to know. Hmm. Okay, my pronunciation over Bobby Kotick, or Bobby Kotick, is something that apparently was contentious as well. Do you have any other game books like this worth checking out? I've been sitting on a copy of Extra Lives for a while. You definitely should read Masters of Doom, and the other Jason Schreier books. Jason Schreier's, like, really, really good stuff, but you might want to speed read through some of the, superfluous text for non-gamers. Blood, Sweat, and Pixels was a lot of fun. I don't want to recommend Ian Bogost, but I read Ian Bogost. Yeah, just stick with Jason Schreier, Masters of Doom, and your copy of Extra Lives, and you'll have like good video game reading for like a whole year. Remind me of the Bill Gates chapter. His genius negotiating tactic is storming and getting out and getting nothing out of it. I get that it's a bold move, but if you don't actually get any funding out of it, it's just being a baby. So what did he do? He left the key to their the shitty bankrupt office building on the table and was like, "Here, you guys have it." But they decided they didn't want to have it. It kind of sounded like he called a bluff. In any case, he also sounds like he has no work experience whatsoever. He must have incredibly soft hands. And, seems to have really gotten hung up on how much gamers hated that quote of his about taking the fun out of video games. He sounds like a sensitive crybaby who likes to masquerade as a tough bulldog businessman. Don't let your fail sons become fail men. The story about him stealing his mom's ashtray and trying to sell it for something at the age of 3 sounds fake, but infuriating if true. Sounds like something his mom would say to mythologize his childhood. A maternal mythologizing. I'm sure all of us who are children of mothers have witnessed that phenomenon. This stream goes good with Half-Life 2. I was playing for the commentary of the devs, but George's narration works well too. Oh hey, Somniorum, you came in here. So the format is that I've been jumping from I've been jumping quite a few chapters ahead to what I predicted would be some of the juiciest stories. Although the further I go in here, I see that I really am being hinted at there being far more juicy stories than I originally might have expected. He skipped chapters. Yeah, I skipped a few chapters. Litigious. George wouldn't be George without his unique interpretation of the English language. From what Schreier wrote, he seems kind of like a poser businessman. I can't imagine someone who has no interest other than money would be fighting so hard to be getting into games/computers. I don't know. I was getting the impression that he was a non-gamer businessman who might play them casually, but otherwise kind of lucked into some very lucrative acquisitions and is generally more interested in being an asshole businessman than a human being with hobbies and interests and a sense of fun. About a stereotypical thing a game executive could say to prove the worst instincts. You always gotta have a guy who thinks about the money. For every Walt Disney, you need a Roy Disney. Yeah, but hopefully the guys who think about the money aren't gonna be as disgusting as this guy. It's an unfortunate necessity that should be poked with a stick and kept as far away as possible. The bits about Titan and Overwatch were some of the most interesting bits. Oh, good, because that's what we're getting into next. Yay. Send in the clowns! It helps if you have a huge amount of people willing to playtest. Yeah, I think game developers should definitely have, like, a 1 to 100 ratio of amount of people who are handling the money and the selling versus the amount of people who are handling the developing and the testing and the artistry. That's not how it's spelled. Welcome to English. That's not how it's spelled. Welcome to English, old chap. Our morphology is a nightmare. Like soldier, solder, or Phil. Phil. If you take the word lofter and add an S to the start of the new word, slaughter, has half the letters pronounced differently. English has a bad writing system. This conversation is also going good with the clown music too, I might add. If you can't pronounce smithing in English, it's a skill issue. Perfect specimen for Trump's FCC chair. Jeez, don't call it. No more prophesizing in the bunny hop chat. I feel like most businessmen are ultimately posers. Yeah, me too. Very few people know what they're actually doing. I think Bobby Kotick might be ashamed of being a little nerd. Yeah, I was getting that vibe too. Which is, yeah, I'm definitely not getting the vibe that he's a super hardcore gamer nerd, though. Like, the book talked about how charismatic he is. He's got people skills. And gamers infamously do not have people skills. Don't speak Esperanto. Okay, so, the next chapter that I wanted to jump to was, about, Overwatch. Project Titan getting canceled and recycled into Overwatch. There's a lot of chapters, a lot of years to cover about how popular Hearthstone was and how Hearthstone was their primary moneymaker for the longest time. And that's going to feel really weird for me to play through because me to read through because I have not played a single minute of Hearthstone. And I, however, am aware that massive amounts of drama, business drama, gamer drama, developer drama, YouTuber drama were playing out in those days. That even though I was around to cover some of the business drama, it's Hearthstone era Blizzard is a whole nother iceberg. 195. We're jumping to page 195. Chapter 19. Titan. If you want to talk about English having very silly syntax when it comes to spelling, this is another easy contender for one of the all-time top 10 most frustrating Englishes. All right, let me quiet the clown music. Thank you so much for that suggestion, by the way. Clown music worked perfectly with that chapter. Who was it? Goku Blocks. Hey, yeah, I recognize you. Send in the clowns. It's Bobby Kotick. Put on clown music. Clown music was one of the best ideas that had been dropped in the chat tonight. Feels like it should be Titian. Titan. Once again, our morphology is a nightmare. Titan. In any case, we are going to be reading now chapter 19. Titan. With this as our background music this time. Alright. The voice might be a little stressed. You might have noticed me make more mistakes that last chapter compared to the previous one. Hopefully I can pick it back up and keep the voice and the eyeball reading smooth and in sync again. Nearly a decade before Heroes of the Storm failed to dethrone League of Legends, Blizzard's developers had a different target in their sights: World of Warcraft. It was 2006, and video game bloggers and analysts crowd daily alike. I'm already screwing up. It was 2006, and video game bloggers and analysts crowed daily about the long-awaited World of Warcraft killer, the game that would draw away its millions of subscribers. Oh, here's a fun thing to note. In print, he's gonna say World of Warcraft killer, but in web on your screen, he's gonna say WoW killer. The game that would draw away its millions of subscribers. Every month, another game failed to pull off the feat, from The Matrix Online to Age of Conan. To paraphrase a certain beloved HBO character, "You come at the Lich King, you best not miss." Still, Blizzard's executives suspected that a WoW killer would be on the horizon sooner or later, so they figured they should be the ones to make it. The natural next step seemed like a world of StarCraft, but they struggled to envision StarCraft lore fitting into an MMO. So instead they decided to develop a new fictional universe. Rob Pardo began gathering a small team of the company's top developers to incubate this project, with the hopes of gradually bringing over the best designers, artists, and programmers from World of Warcraft. Leading the way would be people who had been at Blizzard since the 1990s. Chris Metzen would pin the story, Shane Dabbery would head production, and Justin Thavarat would be art director on the new game, which they called Titan. Every day, the group would hold long lunches to bounce around ideas for the look and theme of Titan, which would be unlike anything they'd done before. Grounded, near-future sci-fi, rather than space or high fantasy. "How do you follow up on the biggest game ever?" Thavarat said. "I couldn't see how we could outdo the same formula." Other video games, like Half-Life and Fallout, painted a grim, dystopic picture. In contrast, Titan would feel bright and optimistic, perhaps attracting people who wouldn't normally play Blizzard games. "We were really excited about appealing to a broad audience," Thavarat said. "Gamers, non-gamers, young, old, men, women, everything in between." Titan would be set on an alternate version of Earth in the 2070s. The hook was that it was essentially two games in one, with players taking control of superhero-like characters who lived normal lives during the day and secretly battled against evil forces at night. An early presentation showed the player, as a professional chef, popping a dish with the oven before going off on a secret mission. When they returned, the dish was perfectly cooked and ready to serve. A couple of years into development, Titan had a small but growing team of engineers, artists, and designers who would meet for brainstorming sessions every week. Their unit, which they called Team 4, was envisioned as an all-star team, bringing in the best staff that Pardo could find both within Blizzard and from elsewhere in the industry. People on other Blizzard teams would look over in envy, sometimes begging for a spot on what would be the company's first brand new franchise in more than a decade. But behind the shiny veneer of this new team was a nasty political battle, a long-running feud between two of the company's top executives that was growing uglier every day. Chris Metzen and Rob Pardo had never seen eye to eye. Metzen was a boisterous, emotional artist and a fountain of early ideas, while Pardo was quieter and more analytical, with a head for game design and an aloof demeanor. The two had first worked together as creative leads on StarCraft's expansion, Brood War, then paired up to help steer Warcraft 3 and World of Warcraft. Both grew increasingly powerful at the company, becoming vice presidents when Adham retired in 2004. The success of their creative collaboration was hard to deny, although to Blizzard staff who worked with them, it felt like parents about to get a divorce. "We'd just sit there for a full hour and watch Metzen and Pardo argue," recalled one developer on StarCraft 2. "Metzen would say it should be pink, and Pardo would instantly say it should be blue, and only an idiot would make it pink. It was painful to watch." During Titan, their battles were more muted but just as frustrating for observers. At least on Warcraft and StarCraft, they'd had a clear vision and years of established lore. Now, they were starting with nothing but a blank piece of paper and a desire to make the next big MMORPG. Metzen would hold brainstorming meetings and fill up whiteboards with ideas, only for Pardo to insist they weren't good enough. "There was a lot of fishing around, and we couldn't really land anything," said one early designer. "We're rocking, doing all this stuff, and then it's just getting erased because Rob's not liking it." People who worked with the pair quickly learned that they had divergent visions for what Titan should become. Metzen wanted to create a superhero universe like the Marvel and DC comics he loved, with godlike figures duking it out in the skies and streets, while Pardo wanted characters to be more like secret agents, spies with superpowers who worked in the shadows to protect the world from insidious threats. As a result of these battles, Metzen left and returned the project multiple times, which created more chaos and confusion. Titan cycled through several writers, each with their own take on the game's lore and story. "The core fantasy of the world was constantly changing," said Jacob Rep, an engineer. As the Titan team expanded, bringing in veteran developers from across the video game industry, they built an endless number of prototypes for the civilian portion of the game. Fishing, farming, photography, gardening, hacking. This non-combat section, which they called the Titan Town, was essentially Blizzard's take on Animal Crossing or The Sims. Players would be able to deck out a house with furniture, run a business, and go on quests for their neighborhoods. During playtests, the Titan team found that some of these game mechanics were fun in isolation, but nobody could envision what game developers call a core loop, or the sequence of actions that players would spend the bulk of their time doing. "It always felt like it was right around the corner," said Thavaret. "Right around this milestone, this is where things would come together." The combat side felt more coherent, but was facing its own issues. Each player would be able to select from one handful of superhero classes, like the speedy, capital J, Jumper, who could perform short teleportations, or the sharpshooting, capital R, Ranger, who wielded a powerful sniper rifle. Players could group up with friends to battle through dungeons or fight one another in team-based competitive battles. These matches could be fun in bursts, but the Titan team struggled to figure out how to keep players engaged over a long period of time. During interviews and financial earnings calls, Blizzard's executives hinted to the public that they were working on a next-generation MMO. A leaked slideshow even revealed the name Titan to the outside world, which led reporters to probe Morhaime and Pardo for more information on the project. Bobby Kotick touted the game during investor presentations and Hollywood parties, occasionally bringing Blizzard developers to meet celebrities like Tom Brady. "These guys made World of Warcraft," he'd say, "and now they're making something even bigger." By the way, that was not a quote. Jason Schreier put those words in italics, so I guess it is a paraphrase of something he would have said or could have said, but did not have a solid record of saying verbatim. Every mention of the game only increased pressure for the Titan team, which was encountering obstacle after obstacle. Riot Games was using all that League of Legends cash to poach Blizzard's staff, including, at one point, nearly the entire animation team. And the underlying technology behind Titan, all designed from scratch for this one project, was hampering their progress, whether it was laggy, incomplete tools, or a faulty version control software that would sometimes prevent the team from working for hours at a time. The industry had evolved since the days of Warcraft and Diablo, when video games had simple 2D art and could be programmed by a dozen people over the course of a year or two. Technological advancements made video games look more beautiful, but they also ramped up the complexity of the development cycle. By the 2000s, teams were swelling to more than 100, and their games might take 3 years or longer to produce. The larger a game team grew, the harder it became to coordinate tech, develop a consistent art style, and execute on a single coherent vision. This is a very good paragraph. That was a very good paragraph that summarizes a lot of the complexity of how different video games are from maybe before the turn of the mid-2000s. What he's talking about, I feel, is the before and after of the Xbox 360 generation, especially. If you ever want to explain to your parents why video games aren't fun anymore, dig up this book, read that paragraph, and paraphrase your own version of that paraphrasing. Team 4's artists drew concepts for Titanfall's colorful classes and futuristic cities. Bright, idyllic versions of regions like Eastern Europe and the Western United States, but many of the designs kept changing as the game evolved into different directions. An internal repository called Titan Art grew so bloated with thousands of images that artists would sometimes draw characters or cities only to later learn that someone else had already done the same years earlier. "The amount of art we did was enough for 5 games, said artist Vadim Bakhilichev. Artist Vadim Bakhilichev. One artist described working on the project as an interminable state of deja vu, like they were living in Groundhog Day. They'd draw costumes and furniture, and then take long lunches, and then fine-tune what they already made. There were no seasons in Irvine. It was always dry, sunny, and 60 to 80 degrees, which made it hard to tell the weeks apart. "Was that yesterday?" the artist said. "Was it last year?" Ooh. "Was it last year? What day was this?" They were proud of the art they were making, but it was not hard to wonder if one day someone was going to come down from the high and realize they weren't making much progress. There was a feeling that Blizzard had essentially written a blank check to fund this game, and that bred a sense of complacency within the team, the artist said. "We were not working with any kind of urgency." Making games was always hard. Making new franchises was even harder. And making a new franchise at a company full of perfectionists, with the pressure of surpassing World of Warcraft, with a team that was growing larger than any project in Blizzard's history, well, that was proving to be impossible. Later, several developers on the team would blame many of Titan's struggles on Rob Pardo. As Blizzard's vice president of game design, Pardo was also overseeing StarCraft II, Diablo 3, and the rest of the company's projects, which limited the time he had for Titan. "He at times seemed like an absentee game director," said one developer. To mitigate this problem, Pardo had brought in two lead designers, Jeff Kaplan, who had designed quests on World of Warcraft, and Matt Brown, who had worked on The Sims and SimCity at EA's Maxis. But Pardo remained director of the project and would occasionally jump in with feedback, forcing the team to change course and potentially throw out months of work. "I think when we want to make something, you have to have a responsibility to lead," said Connie Griffith, who worked as an assistant to Pardo. "And if you're not able to give it your full attention, you need to relinquish control." Rob Pardo first discovered the joys of game design while playing Dungeons & Dragons with his friends, who always wanted him to be the dungeon master, allowing him to create his own rules and build his own campaigns. When he wasn't crafting fictional universes, he was gravitating towards anything competitive. Ice hockey, Risk, video games. He took pride in being the best at anything he played, a trait inherited from his father. "He's probably competitive to a fault and instilled that in me," Pardo later said in a podcast. "He'd never, ever let me win, so if I beat him, it was legit. And if I started winning at some activity we're doing, then mysteriously we'd stop doing that activity." Growing up an only child in Southern California, Pardo had first wanted to be a film director, but decided that was unrealistic, so he went to UC Irvine intending to become a lawyer. Then, while working in an electronics store, he saw a colleague apply for a game testing job at Interplay and followed suit. After bouncing around departments for a couple of years, he left Interplay for a startup, where he and his team pitched a new game to Alan Adham. Adham wasn't interested in the game, but was impressed by Pardo's multiplayer skills and design chops, and soon the two started talking about Pardo coming to Blizzard. Adham hired Pardo in 1997, although there wasn't a formal job for him just yet. Instead, Pardo sat with the QA department, played early builds of StarCraft, and wrote up his thoughts on balance between the three races. Some of his new colleagues looked over and wondered who was this kid sitting with the testers and telling them what to do. It was soon clear, as Pardo was promoted to become the top designer on StarCraft's expansion, Blood War, that he was being positioned as Adham's successor. And when Adham left the company in 2004, Pardo took his role as lead designer of World of Warcraft. After that, Pardo would oversee every game Blizzard made. In May 2006, a Time magazine spread declared Pardo to be one of the 100 most influential people of the year, alongside George Clooney and Stephen Colbert. In a gushing article that referred to him as a minor deity, the magazine treated him as the sole creator of World of Warcraft, a game that had been developed by more than 60 people. Pardo was credited as lead designer, and he had certainly played a key role, but Adam had led the game for the bulk of development. Yet the accolades were breathless. Quote, "Pardo didn't invent this kind of game, he merely perfected it," the magazine gushed. Although the Time article wasn't Pardo's doing, Blizzard staff groused about how he had been portrayed. This was a company that tried hard to avoid glamorizing their developers. It would stamp "Designed by Blizzard Entertainment" atop the credits of every game as a way of showing that everyone at the company had contributed. Adham and Morheim had always preached that Blizzard had no rock stars, yet Pardo was becoming an industry celebrity. He bought a red Lamborghini and began wearing more fashionable clothes as Griffith, his assistant, recalled watching him, quote, become this different person, end quote. A smart, thoughtful leader who also, quote, used that power to indulge himself, end quote. He wasn't the only one at Blizzard who was changed by fame and fortune, but he was one of the most powerful. As Pardo rose through the company's ranks, he became a polarizing figure at Blizzard. Employees griped that he would take credit for other people's ideas, and in one interview, he even claimed responsibility for Adham's old donut theory, which had been one of Blizzard's core principles since long before he had joined. He also cultivated a reputation for passing the buck when things went wrong. During the development of Diablo 3, Pardo asked the team to build a new interface for the chat system, according to two people who worked on it. After a few months of development, the team had a check-in meeting with Morheim, who was shocked they had wasted their time and asked why they weren't just using World of Warcraft system. Quote, Pardo said, "Yeah, why would you guys do this?" recalled one person on the team. "He threw the team under the bus. We had to scramble to redo it." A charitable explanation would be that Pardo simply forgot he made the request, but the incident, and several others like it, left Blizzard staff complaining that he tended to use first-person pronouns when things went well, and then second-person pronouns when they went awry. As Pardo's responsibilities grew and his time became stretched between projects, he became known for what many of his subordinates called seagull management. He would swoop down, poop on ideas, and then fly away. "He's a brilliant designer, he's just a terrible manager," said Greg Street, a lead on World of Warcraft, which was common at Blizzard. His negativity could grate colleagues and sometimes blurred the lines between criticism and bullying. Later, Pardo would say on a podcast that he believed in being honest and direct. And you know, as my own commentary here, and you know what kind of people like to say those words. Later, Pardo would say on a podcast that he believed in being honest and direct, and that people's most influential teachers were often their harshest critics. "I think the game industry is filled with a lot of really nice people," he said. "I think that makes for really good work environments, but it's not always good for teaching. You think about teaching, you need to be willing to tell people they're doing things wrong. A lot." Grumblings about Pardo's management style would sometimes make their way to Morheim, but his talent and status as a Blizzard old-timer appeared to outweigh the problems. Pardo had played a pivotal role in developing hit after hit for Blizzard, and had even helped to protect Hearthstone from getting cancelled. As vice president, he had preached about the power of opportunity hires, finding and recruiting the industry's most talented people even if Blizzard doesn't have a specific role for them yet. And he had brought aboard some of Blizzard's most important contributors, like Ray Gresko, Hamilton Chu, and Jay Wilson. By 2013, he had joined Blizzard's C-suite as Chief Creative Officer. At this point, Titan had gone from a dream project to demoralizing for many members of Team 4. Designers would spend weeks getting excited about an idea, then set up a meeting with Pardo to review it, only for him to shoot it down without offering an explanation or an alternative direction. On previous games, not everyone had always agreed with Pardo's decisions, but at least he had made them. On Titan, he appeared to be unwilling or unable to commit to a vision, perhaps because of the pressure. "There was this fear of the sophomore album," said Griffith. "What can we do that's as good as World of Warcraft?" With years of development behind them and very little to show, the Titan team began building a vertical slice set in the game's near-future version of California, complete with a suite of mechanics like driving and combat. Part of the demo were excellent, but it became clear that their cohesion problem wasn't going away. It felt as if they had made a dozen different games but had no way to unify them, like a jigsaw puzzle where the pieces wouldn't fit together, and they continued to struggle with both technical and artistic challenges. But this was Blizzard. Surely Team 4 would get more to nail down Titan. "The work was super inefficient and the scope constantly grew," said one artist. "But everyone trudged along calmly, assuming Blizzard would continue funding the endeavor indefinitely." One morning in the spring of 2013, as developers on the Titan team trickled into the office, they noticed that rows of folding chairs had been set up in the common area for an impromptu all-hands meeting. When it started, Pardo stood up and dropped the big news. Titan wasn't working out, so he and the other Blizzard executives had decided to reboot it. For Justin Thavarat, the art director, this was bittersweet news. On one hand, they were throwing away countless hours worth of work from his nearly 7 years on this project that would never be seen. On the other, he recognized that Titan couldn't keep going the way it was headed. "It was tough," Thavarat said, "but there was also a little bit of relief." At the end of the day, Titan cost Blizzard around $80 million, according to people with knowledge of the financials. Many of its staff moved to Blizzard's other teams, while a few were laid off. Jeff Kaplan, Chris Metzen, and a handful of other artists and engineers stayed behind to try and figure out whether Titan's remains could be salvaged. Later, Pardo stood up in front of the company, tears in his eyes, as he gave a presentation about why Titan had failed. He noted that he should have done more about the game's technical and artistic problems, which Team 4 members saw as a backhanded way of blaming other people for the game's issues. The last straw for some. The longtime Blizzard designer had stewarded a lot of great games and was Morhaim's heir apparent, but now he had lost the trust of Blizzard's other leaders. Several executives and directors, including Metzen, demanded that he be removed from a position of leadership. They didn't want to report him anymore, didn't want him overseeing their new projects. But Morhaim may have still been haunted by his decision to remove Mike O'Brien as lead of Warcraft 3 back in 1999, which had led to the departure of 3 top Blizzard programmers and the creation of ArenaNet, a significant competitor. In retrospect, Morhaim would tell confidence that he felt like he should have taken a more diplomatic approach back then. Now, he didn't want to repeat the same mistake and drive away one of the people who he believed was most integral to Blizzard's success. Problem was, by doing nothing, Morhaim might drive away a group of other people who were integral to Blizzard's success, as Paul Sams and other executives tried to make clear during a series of lengthy conversations in the weeks that followed. Pardo took a sabbatical as Morhaim and his team tried to determine his future at Blizzard. At first, they talked about potentially shifting his responsibilities, but after a few months, Morhaim met Pardo and told him it would be best if he resigned. In the summer of 2014, Pardo announced that he was leaving Blizzard, saying publicly that he had made the, quote, difficult and bittersweet but ultimately exciting decision to pursue the next chapter in my life and career. Quote, the failure of Titan would have ripple effects for years to come. Huh. So he resigned in 2014, and I believe Overwatch came out in 2015. When was this meeting? Oh, this is the end of the chapter, by the way. We got to learn about the cancellation behind Titan, but not necessarily about how it was recycled into Overwatch. So one morning in the spring of 2013, they noticed rolls of folding chairs. Okay. So Overwatch, if I'm remembering correctly, I think that was 15? 2015 is when? Or was it 16? 16. So, oh my god. Oh! Titan gets officially rebooted in 2011. They keep working on it, turning it into Overwatch for 5 years, when it sounds like the concept... You could have heard a concept extremely close to what Overwatch would become in the beginning of that chapter, where you play as superhero-like characters who have PvP matches with each other, and exist in a optimistic, utopic sort of sci-fi future with shiny, clean cities. And that still must have been... That was 7 years! God. I hate imagining what it must be like to work on something that long. This is no passion project either. This was a big studio development with 100 people minimum working on it, right? So 7 years working on a project that that is constantly that has really, really suspicious, fishy, wishy-washy big business types pulling the strings at the highest levels, and then like confused middle managers who really are like programmers and game designers, but in this management position where they have to discipline people and be mean sometimes and manage money and for products that have to weigh some degree of cynicism, capitalistic cynicism. That must have been a very disillusioning 7-year stretch. I do not like imagining it. It does not sound fun. That does not sound like the kind of fun vibe that people regarded game development with in the 80s and 90s. That sounds like the opposite. That sounds like a soul-crushing corporate job. Sometimes you get to do art, but it sounds like most of the time you're following someone else's instructions on a very tight deadline with very weird and demanding requests for corrections to get made along the way, only for that work to get thrown away later, and then they require you to do it over and over again to eventually make a product that's not even that different from the original concept from 7 years ago. 7 years making a project that has to make every individual member of the team happy, along with all the people popping in. And that's ultimately too many people. This is actually wonderful. This is wonderful. This is fantastic. This is a wonderful treatise on what happened to AAA game development. The whole problem about team sizes bloating up too big is being explored in an intimate way on the human's perspective here. The problem about budgets blowing up way too big is being explored by like individuals' biographies. It's a very personal look at what have typically been regarded as very abstract, large problems that are hard to visualize on an individual perspective until you start reading stuff like this. This is great. This is great. I'm going to be reading the rest of it. If you guys want to find out what happens to the rest of Blizzard Entertainment's history, and what I think is almost more important and makes me a hell of a lot more interested in this book. I'm not necessarily the biggest Blizzard fan in the world, but this is, I feel like I have heard these stories play out at many other studios several times. Maybe one of which, something like this, was kind of sort of going on in the later days of the Kojima production studio at Konami, where MGS5 takes a decade extra time, almost a decade of extra time compared to the previous sequels, and it seems like what comes out is kind of deflationary and not as passionate as the previous ones. This isn't I was a little less interested in this Schreier compared to the others, and I never shouldn't have been, because I'm not a huge Blizzard fan, but really this is like applicable to many other studios. I need to talk about the book in those terms. That's good stuff. That's really good stuff. I was being kind of feces-ish earlier about how all of us creative types might have some lessons to learn, but it feels like if you are working at a big game publisher, if your career intersects with AAA to some extent, you should read this as a cautionary tale. The people in charge should read this. That's, maybe they'll get something out of it that might make AAA gaming a little more exciting again. I don't know if this will surprise anyone whatsoever, but I was planning on playing some games on this stream after reading a sampling of excerpts from this book. But they're sure not going to be AAA games. They're going to be weird free demos for Steam games, which also carries with it its own 3-hour podcast worth of a can of worms, but at least are certainly more fun and enjoyable and artistically inspiring to play nowadays. But it kind of feels like if you want a grueling first-person perspective of what it's like seeing AAA games turn from fun, creative fantasies of mainstream universal interests, like being a secret agent or a mythological hero, and end up getting turned into slop about being a soldier fighting a war, with some government propaganda money involved, with very, very little of the previous energy and passion and creativity being involved. This is gonna this might explain why, even if you're not a big Blizzard fan, this might explain why you no longer like your own favorite video game franchise from your youth. Woo! So let's scroll through the chat before moving on, because I quite like this reading block, then intermission to look at the chat, then back to reading block format. Things are paced very, very nicely this way, and the music, I believe, helps too. Alright, so what did you guys talk about while I was reading all that? Let's find out. I see that the chat message. Me, I'm the World of Warcraft killer. It was actually a slow suicide in FF14. Yeah, slow suicide. This is a good way to describe the feeling of what might be happening to this company. It also feels like there was so much collective faith in Blizzard being able to pull through that no one was really afraid to pull some stops and get extra dramatic about streamlining and tightening up their bloated game designs in the 2010s and 20s. Maybe is this what happens when a company hires its own fans over a long period of time? Because I do believe Schreier explains something like that happening with modern Bungie, that the Bungie developers who made Halo, eventually got tired of making a science fiction themed first person shooter with low gravity and bullet spongy combat. They made a great one, then made a sequel that was good, then made another sequel that was good, and eventually 13 years had passed, and that's all they made, and they eventually got tired and wanted to finally get around to making Pimps at Sea. But the economic dynamics ultimately wouldn't let them, and so the original developers would eventually retire and grow tired of making Halo, and to replace them, they ended up hiring Halo fans who made Destiny, a multiplayer-centric science fiction first-person shooter with low gravity and some sponginess going on to the combat. Oh, Team 4 was the breast milk stealer team. I'm imagining like a heist movie where like two guys are on walkie-talkies and the screen is split up between them, and one of them's like, Team 4, do you got the breast milk? No, that was Team 3. Team 3 is the breast milk stealer team. Roger that. Team 3, you got the breast milk? Team 4 was the breast milk stealer team. I got a mouthful of Eddie breath while laughing. Gross. Oh, what a wonderful dog. I played Overwatch with people I never played any games with before, so easy to pick up. Yeah, that was kind of my experience with it. I'm not really a Blizzard fan, and I'm definitely not an Overwatch fan, but I have probably played 30 hours of Overwatch, primarily with a girlfriend who was not a big fan of first-person shooter games, and found that to be the only one she was really able to enjoy. So, that kind of fits the company philosophy, I feel, and maybe why I've never been the biggest Blizzard fan in the world, is that the idea is to take existing game development existing game design concepts that are popular with hardcore gamers and figure out how to make a casual competitive multiplayer burst session experience out of it that is easy to learn. This whole thing about changing the lore constantly reminds me that the titular League of Legends was retconned by Riot a few years. So what is the actual League of Legends? And why does it no longer exist? What did they retcon? There are legends and they are in a league. I don't know anything about this. Every time I play Overwatch, I think, oh, this is just sports. Yeah, kinda. I also kind of feel like sometimes when I look at Overwatch, I look at it and I think, oh, this is just Marvel slop. It gives me sports and Marvel slop vibes, which is great for mainstream appeal, but not great for hardcore gamer nerd appeal. Jeff Kaplan wanted to make Overwatch an MMO. Overwatch 3 was supposed to be the MMO, but it got shut down. Wait a second, Overwatch 2 barely even exists as it is, though. The company is like... I mean, I guess I gotta read more chapters of the book, but the company nowadays really absolutely seems like it's operating on maybe not a skeleton crew of people, but a skeleton crew of concepts and ideas and IPs. It's interesting that Titan was supposed to have a large self-directed social component, as I think the strength of Overwatch's cast was a big part of its success. Like, I don't think you can fix that. Is the cast the players or pre-existing characters? Are the players just supposed to exist in a form of digital cosplay? I don't think those two approaches mix. I don't know, though. Trig the Discovery. You might want to look at this up. I feel like there was at least one successful Marvel superhero-themed game that had the social non-combat opponent, like the town, the Titan town they were describing, where your superheroes do daily normal activities when they're not doing superhero fighting. Hasn't there been... Correct me if I'm wrong, but I swear, I don't know the name of it. I think it was a mobile game. Hasn't there been at least one Marvel superhero game where you manage the Marvel heroes in some kind of town? I don't think they had their competitive first-person shooting or third-person RPG, whatever Titan was supposed to be. The competitive aspect of it involved. But I can't help it. I'm sure it was less interesting in your hands to play. But the way Schreier describes the Titan Town existing alongside Overwatch-style matches does actually sound like a more interesting game concept to me. A tired hardcore gamer nerd who is now more interested in non-combative games. Who is getting his kicks out of how to gamify conflicts that are not inherently violent. And if there is a violent competitive part of the game, then like incorporating that into the non-violent mechanics in a way that is elegant and clever and funny. Yeah, the idea for Titan does at least sound more interesting than the idea for Overwatch, which is not that far off from class-based first-person multiplayer shooters that are kind of sort of a dime a dozen. Like an existing... an extremely polished and streamlined for mainstream audiences and very artistically designed for friendly, easy-to-look-at mainstream appeal version of something that's kind of sort of been done a dime a dozen times before and thus did not appeal to me. I remember comparing it to Rainbow Six Siege at the time, which retroactively is a hilarious comparison, but I think helps illustrate where my own personal preferences were at the time and where they are now. Oh yeah, and then there's guys who think it's a virtue to say that they're like, I think we should just... Or, no, they don't say we, because they always imagine themselves as some kind of exceptional quality above other people. Like, unlike other people, I like to tell the truth and say it how it is. And those kinds of people don't really tell the truth. They just kind of say the first thing that comes in their head. And they also don't tell it like it is. They kind of say the first thing that comes in their head, which is processed through a ridiculous amount of personal biases that tend to get ironed away when you politely brainstorm and socialize with your team on a friendlier level. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I should feel bad for the guy because he doesn't sound evil like Bobby Kotick. But what was the name? Pardo? I might be able to look it up faster with Google. Rob Pardo, yeah. Yeah, I don't know if I feel bad for him, but he does kind of sound like like a jerk. I guess he might have been extremely coddled and complimented and developed quite an ego in his younger years if he went from teenager tester to borderline rock star designer within a decade. That probably does something to someone's ego that makes it hard to resist the call of becoming a jerk. Bobby Kotick, on the other hand, there's no excuse. The chapter begins talking about how he came out of the womb wanting to sell his mother's property. I had a professor like that. He was emotionally damaging. Honesty is when I get to be an asshole. Sunglasses. Absolutely fascinating to watch a studio that seems opposed to managing anything. It does not sound as bad as Valve, though. We're still waiting on the Jason Schreier tell-all expose about whatever the hell happened to Valve. It's weird, though, like... Does whatever the hell happened to Valve have a happy ending? I don't know. If the people they hired up are feeling creatively unfulfilled, if they have a lot of cool ideas that are unable to get completed, and if that is causing them disillusionment and depression, that's not a happy ending. But it does seem like a kind of happy ending that a company manages to find a niche and dominate it perpetually by actually being good and better than the competitors and earning the good graces of its customers. And if that came at the sacrifice of game development, which is hard and sticky and a nightmare sometimes, that's a slightly positive ending. But I imagine that this is somewhat similar. The Valve development philosophy really does not like any kind of hierarchy at all, and that's not what I'm getting from Blizzard. They have their hierarchy. They just seem like they can't decide if they want to be strict asshole bosses that demand professionalism or casual fun bosses who say it like it is and be honest. Oh, did I just say a contradiction? I got caught up in how the contrasting side of the foils I was presenting were from a antiquated, anachronistic version of Blizzard from the 90s that's not coming back and thus not comparable to the current management style. Okay, yeah, Eldritch T has it right. In all capital letters, we have a manifesto here. I want cheaper games with worse graphics made by people who are paid more to work less, and I'm not kidding. We might want to amend this statement and say that we want cheaper games with worse graphics made by human individuals who are paid more to work less, and not kidding. That would qualify the issue of any kind of glut of AI-developed games, which, for the record, don't really seem to be happening, like I think a lot of us were fearing. But it would also account for games being made by teams of hundreds of people. If you say human individuals, it's still easy to imagine, like, 10, maybe even 20 or 30 human individuals making a game. Yeah, what games these days are made by, like, 20 or 30 dev team-size people? Are these the AA games I keep hearing about? Is Radio Commander Pacific Campaign a AA game made by a team of 20 people? I feel like the games I like these days are made by like 1 to 3 people. And I don't know how sustainable that is long term, but the 20 to 30 person game might be where the most fun can be had for the longest period of time in the foreseeable future. Panhandling for George to do the audiobook version. Well, you're in the Discord. If you guys want to see me do projects that are... Oh, I don't know if I can advertise the Discord on the basis that there's projects to be found in there that are too spicy for more public platforms, but I also at the same time don't want anyone to get any ideas that an audiobook version of a Jason Schreier book that already has a perfectly fine audiobook are gonna be available. Audible, please hire George. Absolute big recommend. Ice Cream's onto something. The burden of success. They wanted to turn it into an MMO the whole time. They didn't know what to do with the lightning in a bottle of Overwatch 1. Projects taking so long is one of those things that gets to me. It really puts some perspective on how if you get in the industry now, you may only be able to work on 5 to 7 titles in your whole career. Yeah, and imagine how depressing that would be if they're all the same franchise. I really don't like the idea, but it seems to be an accepted, semi-permanent idea for the foreseeable future. That, like, a game developer only makes one game for their whole existence. What are some examples? Bungie is the Destiny company. Neversoft has been in the Call of Duty mines for over a decade, I believe. Like, yeah, that has to be incredibly psychologically damaging to a certain point. The repetition of drudgery, office work drudgery is well enough documented, and this seems like a part of that problem. That's definitely not the same vibe people were regarding game development with the 80s and 90s, though. Like we heard, it sounded like everyone was having fun and thinking of it as fun. I Am Your Beast just dropped a free story expansion. Yes, George, have you played Mouthwashing? No, but I want to. Oh my god, they wanted to make fancy Pop Tropica. Pop Tropica. Is that what I was thinking of? No, it was not. What in the world is Pop Tropica? Why do you know what Pop Tropica is? Can you fucking imagine pitching Titan and realizing that a popular kids game does the same concept? What do you think is the optimal team size for most games? No! No more conversations about optimizing things or things being good. Everyone is a highly complicated, unique individual, therefore, big, expensive game projects should be regarded as something that is, not a constant. What do you think is the optimal team size for most games? Obviously, smaller games don't require as many people, but is there a team size that tips over to everyone tripping over each other? To the latter part of the question, yes, it does seem like this is happening. However, Resident Evil 6 was made by like a team of 200 or some ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous amount of people. And it got panned. Later on got a cult following. So I don't know. What do you think is the optimal team size for most games? I don't know. You guys are listening to me like I'm an expert, and yet I still have not actually worked on a game. But I do think that I am enjoying games made by 40 or less people these days. I want to say Liam's games, like Curse to Golf. Now he's doing the Palm Tanuki's Summer. If I got the game right, let me just correct that. Tanuki Pond Summer. I was close. I've seen pictures of their teams, and I want to say they're around 16 to 20. The things that have the biggest place in my heart right now are like 1 to 2 person games. When you have that much individual personality coming out, I feel there is really something going on that you're not getting, even from smaller games that have the team size eke past a 16 person mark. I think Ocarina of Time was 40. 40 people spent 4 years working on a game that does not really play or look like any other game that they were working on, so that must have Maybe that's the optimal way. If you want to make, like, not an indie game, a mainstream successful game. Oh, no. That statement wouldn't have worked either. The one I was cooking, I gotta toss it out. Because if you want to make a mainstream successful game and have it be a reliable bet, you need the fucking graphics. And who absolute... Did you hear the disgust in my voice? Like regarding the graphics being good or fancy, I do regard with disgust now. They plateaued 10 years ago. Games don't look any better than they did 10 years ago, and yet they require far more expensive hardware than they did before because of absolute bullshit reasons. Cryptocurrency, AI, a deadly global pandemic. For those who want to go real far back, there was the 2011 Fukushima disaster and tsunamis that spiked the price of electronics up way big. I'm no longer a fan of simple explanations and simple answers. The reason why PC gaming hardware jumped up so fast is complicated, and there is not one simple answer. Therefore, what I think is the optimal team size for games is a problem I don't know, because it is far more complicated than the question can really encompass. It sounded like bad project management from leadership who doesn't care enough to guide the project day to day, but enough to put their foot down easily. Yes. Where was the guiding vision for Project Titan during its first 3 years? And why was no one shining a spotlight with clear borders around the edges of the spotlight circle for the rest of the staff to be working within? I think bad management after this book will be an easy more... Bad game development management strategies and tactics will be something easier to talk about than what the optimal size should be or what the optimal graphical fidelity level should be. Until someone writes a big complicated book, or no, a big book that summarizes the complicated problems in a succinct way regarding those. On the subject of hiring fans, is the difference between games and comics? Oh, I have no idea. The length of scale of production. Hiring an artist or writer and letting them fail over a single 30-page issue is probably lower stakes than the 40 to 80 person ever. Oh, yeah. Actually, yeah, no, sure. The difference between games and comics, the length of scale of production. Also, the amount of artist required is night and day. I don't know. I'm not a comic book guy, but they've got to be cheap. I don't know if they're cheap to produce, but they've got to be way astronomically cheaper. Oh, Eddie. They've got to be astronomically cheaper compared to games. No comparison whatsoever. Absolutely. Yeah, games will include comic books oftentimes. It's not quite the other way around. Games cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make. I don't know if any comic book ever has costed as much as many games have cost. Hiring modders/fans was also notoriously a problem with Romero's Ion Storm. Oh, I thought I heard good things about Ion Storm. Hiring your own fans reminds me of how people complain about the new seasons of Survivor because all the cast members are just huge Survivor nerds, not their own unique personalities. On the subject of hiring fans, I did get everyone's questions about hiring fans. Yeah, it's the budgets and time. There is no place for experimentation on the AAA game space, which ideally would mean that maybe you could get, like, I don't know if this is how Hollywood movies still work anymore, but when I was growing up, Hollywood movie studios would fund weird, small, risky movies with reliable budgets from big blockbusters. But what seems to be pretty scary about AAA gaming is that some of the big AAA reliable blockbusters aren't as reliable as they used to be. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like Call of Duty has not been reviewing well for about 5 years, and I think that's correlating with a steady decrease in sales. But I might be wrong about that. The video game industry changes so much, and the products themselves are such complicated machines that run on complicated machines that trying to be weird and experimental in a AAA game is a non-starter, and visualizing what the future for AAA games would look like is also kind of hard to do. You can reliably bet that 10 years from... Oh, I hate imagining it. But you can reliably bet that 10 years from now, some kind of first-person shooter with hit-scan guns where you point and click on military-themed bad guys is going to be a reliable kind of game to make. But beyond that, I don't know if people were really accurately predicting that live service never-ending multiplayer games would be as popular as they would be 5 years before that happened. And before that happened, I don't think people were predicting that, big giant open world sandbox games would be as normal as they became for a while. Oh, Midnight Suns? Is this the game featuring comic book characters from multiple Marvel comic properties? It's turn-based XCOM style combat, not an Animal Crossing style thing. Oh, and this is another thing. McCarstensen, what is the current pop culture zeitgeist anyway? We're past peak Marvel, we've moved past Game of Thrones, Baldur's Gate blew up, but I don't think that overtook pop culture. That's another problem that makes it very hard to visualize what the future of a popular AAA video game would look like 10 years from now, is that the idea of a pop culture monoculture is definitely fizzling away as people's entertainment preferences become more and more highly personable. So maybe AAA gaming should just go away in its time. There's not going to be any big video game crash required for it, but just reallocate the AAA assets towards AA projects. Quit trying to make the biggest, best game ever, and start trying to make reliably, artistically satisfying human experiences. I don't really think that, like, the movie world and movie history has some of the same visions of there being one ultimate movie to rule over them all. Like when Blizzard was coming up with the idea for Warcraft and decided that if they just tackled multiplayer onto Dune 2, it would be the best video game ever made at that time. If it comes from your unfiltered consciousness, then it at least feels more genuine. Okay, well, why are the filters not genuine? They're just as real as the rest of the parts of your personality. George just doesn't understand. It's not ideas from the top of my head I didn't think through. It's heterox ideas that break through the echo chamber. I want to play a game made by a dog. This might be possible with dogs that you know and love in your own life. If you have a dog and you're playing with the dog and you are realizing that the type of play you are engaging with the dog is operating within some kind of limited framework that encourages some sense of imagined competition or contests for demonstrating superiority, then you may well be able to get a dog to decide some parts of the rule and some other parts. For example, last night I was playing with my lovely little puppy Eddie, and I wanted him to finish eating his food for the night. And so he had a little ropey ball that I was throwing back and forth, but at some point my parental instincts for him to eat his dinner before bed took over, and I rolled his little food dish right in front of his face and pointed at it and was like, "Okay, Eddie, if I'm gonna throw you this ball again, you have to eat your food." And he like looked at me and turned his head away and kept grabbing at the ball, and he ended up picking up a piece of kibble and like thinking about eating it and putting it back on the floor. And I don't know if he intended me to do this or not, but what the subconscious George then decided to do in that moment was pick the piece of kibble up, throw it halfway across the room, and Eddie had a blast with that and loved it. And at one point during this exchange, he like huffed angrily over to his little ropey bally toy, looked at me and huffed again, and then waddled angrily back to his food bowl, actually finally finished eating the rest of his food, and then pranced all playfully back to his rope toy and ran over to me and brought it to me and started giving me play signals. I feel like there were a couple exchanges in the play I was doing with Eddie there where we were gauging each other's interactions within the framework of a limited system under a guise of trying to get the other person to do something and then laughing about it when it ends up working. If you want to play a game made by a dog, there's probably some way to stretch the definitions of that words of that statement up enough to where it is possible, but it's definitely not going to be a video game that you're playing on a computer. Vampire Survivors, there you go. That's a 1 to 10 person game. I think AI is still coming. I hear nothing about using AI at work. It's terrible. I've played with some AI tools and found it ridiculously less useful than advertised and feared, and I predict it'll be a bubble that'll burst. Whatever disruptions it cause, I predict to be relatively minor in the grand scheme of human history. Pro Country, Sorry We're Closed, Mouthwashing, Little Kitty, Big City. Yes, those are the good games these days. There's AI content in the new COD apparently, profile ban. Yeah, but like, who fucking gives a shit? That's not even like, for the artists who would otherwise be working on that, that's not necessarily, I don't know if that really represents a great loss in opportunities of their career, if the opportunity was profile banners in a Call of Duty game. If you go on Steam, there's a lot of AI image gen and AI text to voice. If you go on Steam, are we talking about the garbage parts of Steam no one goes on? Because I have not seen those parts. I've been browsing demos, and I think all the AI games I've seen are ones that are deliberately sought out and shared by a kind of troll type guy in the Dad and Sons Discord server who seems to get some kind of kick out of playing the garbage. I don't get a kick out of playing the garbage. I've not seen this stuff. I've not really experienced with that stuff. I might be speaking anecdotally, of course, but that's basis for my opinion on that. Most Annapurna/Revolver games are in that 20 to 30 zone. I think DE and Patho have about 20 to 30 people team. Devolver, not Revolver. George to Jason, now do Ubisoft. I wanna hear about Valve. I feel like CD Projekt in Poland would also be a fun one to get a Jason Schreier style expose about, with 350 interviews and a decade of compiled research of stories he was holding on to. Join the Discord to experience the joy and wonder of us all sitting on silence on a Discord call for 6 hours. What do you mean? We were making art. We were making art. For those who don't know, the Super Bunny Hop Discord server, which you can join on the $10 Patreon tier, has gotten into a community habit of having 6-hour-long productivity sessions. If you were worried about me slacking off on this ridiculously long, hour-long video that all the YouTubers making hour-long videos, then you can have your fears assuaged for sure, for fucking sure, by joining me for these 6 hours of everyone in Discord sitting in complete silence while like classical music is playing and everyone's doing work. We have me writing and editing the script and the annotated stage notes and gathering up the media. There's people drawing in there. There's if you have hours of drudgery ahead of you and want to make it as pleasurable as possible to get through, this turned out to be a ridiculously good idea that I should actually announce finally in some official capacity and commit to a real schedule over. The Patreon productivity sessions are one of the best ideas I've ever had, and have kind of saved my life, but my computer's fan started making weird noises. Excuse me one moment. Well, I'll be figuring that out in 15 minutes, because that's how much stream time I have left. That's not the hard drive, is it? Let me give that one more listen. It sounds like a bug crawled in a fan and it's getting slapped around. I think that's all that happened. I'll take a peek at it in a few minutes. But my computer is rattling right now as I am speaking. You cannot hear it, but I can, I believe. But anyways, yes, if you have hours of drudgery ahead of you and want a positive, productive Eddie, you're scrolling the chat and want a positive, productive way to handle that in a supportive community environment where focus music, lo-fi, classical, and also Silent Hill study ambiance is playing in the background with people who are your peers who you will listen to if they tell you to get back to work, you slacker. Come join the Super Bunny Hop Patreon server at the $10 tier. It's great. For $10 a month, you'll consider it an investment. For $10 a month, you'll do thousands of dollars worth of work in the Discord voice chat channels. Yes, Eldritch T. If you simply Google Super Bunny Hop Patreon, you'll get that. Optimal team size for SBH is alternating between giving George ketamine and cocaine and releasing him like a condensed pack of wolves on a concept no one's really paid attention to yet. I don't know, I might just get distracted and cook food in the kitchen or something. I come from movies. This is like transitioning from covering multiplex movies to film festival movies. You get a different kind of people who make them. Oh, what? Unfortunately, the latest Call of Duty had the most sales in the franchise history? Really? I mean, in 10 years, there might be only one game studio left due to the buying of game studios. Just a matter of knowing how the filters work, I guess, and when you're like over filtering also. I don't think AAA is going away. Damn. Unfortunately, big hits like Fortnite are getting so big that they can fund your existence forevermore. I would not consider Fortnite a AAA game, and I'm wondering how many people in the business do. It definitely has an advertising budget, but that was not nearly as expensive to make as a Call of Duty probably is, for sure. Fortnite, I don't consider Fortnite much of a threat. I think Fortnite's fine. Fortnite might be the closest thing to a monoculture the kids have these days. Unfortunately, big hits like Fortnite are getting so big that they can fund your existence forevermore. Hmm. Okay. The Hero 001 has probably a more expert opinion on how much AI developed games we should be looking forward to in the future. The most useful stuff for AI is incredibly boring stuff. Identify a bird from its bird calls. Take a picture of a text and turn it into a text document. The AI tech now will turn into something boring and useful in 10 years you'll never think about. For making creative art stuff, I think there's a pretty natural cap on how far it ever really can go, because the whole technology requires hundreds of hours worth of other people's work to plagiarize. And like, as far as a lot of the free or consumer grade tools go, they just don't work. The other night I was working on the Kriegspiel video and I found a really nice image of Frederick the Great sitting at a camp with his soldiers in tents in the background. And I'm making this video about strategy game history being pretty decisively determined around that guy's generational time period. And I had a quote from that guy that is related to the rule sets that game developers adapted into the games, where he says something like, excuse me one moment while I bring it up. Within every 2 leagues of terrain, there are 200 possible positions for infantry to take. That's a really fun quote about military strategy that I am using in the context of military game developers deciding to have a particular interest on the number 2 when deciding their scaling systems for their games. And I was going to put this on the screen next to an image of Frederick the Great, looking like he is saying something like that to hundreds of soldiers he's ordering around, to emulate the idea of an omniscient strategy game player ordering soldiers around. But I could not find the source of this image. The artist, the year it was made. I looked and looked and looked. I tried several reverse image search tools, and none of them found an original source for who the artist is, how this thing cropped up on the internet. Apparently, at some point, Shutterstock got a license for it. And I, out of desperation, I asked ChatGPT, hey, ChatGPT, who is the artist of this image that I will link to on this URL? And so ChatGPT basically compiled a reverse image search and made a really bad summary of the first 4 Google search results and said, thank you. The artist behind this image is Frederick the Great. They very confidently said the wrongest thing possible. And all it was the same exact thing your brain is going to be thinking anyway when looking with your eyeballs at the first 4 Google search results. It's garbage. It's not helpful. It's done nothing for me except confidently declare wrong answers to all the questions I'm asking it. I do get better results when asking the same question into Google. If I want a template for an apology letter or a pitch, I could Google that instead of saying, hey, ChatGPT, can you write my pitch for me? You will get the exact same amount of time saved and labor saved by just Googling sample pitch document and then copy pasting your own words into whatever you find there. Oh, there was a donation, by the way? Oh my god, I got $60 from a former WoW player. I I hope you have moved on to better times, my friend. Give us Eddie's opinion. Eddie wants to respond to chat too. Debugging by Grace Hooper, as read by George. Wait, what was that in response to? Fortnite and Roblox are some of the most moneyed game projects, period. Oh, Roblox I do consider a threat. I don't know if I consider Fortnite a threat to the sanctity and artistry of long-term video gaming, but Roblox, on the other hand, is a terrifying monster. Get even more boring with your possible AI use case, i.e. a bunch of bureaucratic financial number crunching / super granular productivity increases. No, unironically, yeah. For legal documents particularly, maybe it could decrease the costs of getting legal assistance for your projects if they can save the giant fucking amount of time it takes to copy paste something from Google, the top 4 Google search results. Here's a New York Times article link that does not exist by Frederick the Great. I've never bothered with those AI searches when Google has served me just fine. Yep, that's... for my purposes, ChatGPT has been indistinguishable from Google. And Eddie's trying to get down, but I don't want him tangled up in my cords. Is he trying to get down or not? Eddie, what are you trying to do? Go. Go, go, go. You got this. There you go. All right. 6 minutes, and I'll be wrapping up and immediately investigating why my computer's rattling. I switched away from Google because of the AI thing popping up all the time at the top now. Yeah, Google's kind of garbage, but they're figuring it out, I think. Yeah, you got to use multiple search engines these days. You got to party like it's 1999 and use multiple search engines. When looking for this image lookup, for example, I unironically actually got better results through Yandex. Yandex has been the alternative Google for me for the past maybe 16 months. A lot of old internet forum threads are evidently still indexed on whatever database Yandex is using. I did use the Bing search result, Bing image search service to try and find the artist behind this image of Frederick the Great. I shit you not, Bing image search directed me to an actual neo-Nazi propaganda website where I saw the cached summary of an article about how Frederick the Great is a model white man who all white men need to aspire to, and I don't... From what I know about him from Wikipedia summaries, I don't think he would have been a fan of the whole Nazi stuff that would happen later in Germany. But anyways, George, wasn't there in our productivity chat when we stopped what we were doing to do a Mario-themed Smash and Pass? Right! If you want to get thousands of dollars worth of work done and millions of dollars worth of thoughts thunk, then come throw away $10 of loose change on the Super Bunny Hop Patreon server, where in between stimulating productivity work sessions, you will finally get to decide which Mario characters you are most either sexually attracted to or pragmatically marriageable to. Return to Ask Jeeves to... No! What if some corrupt Bobby Kotick type investor out there is looking to buy up Ask Jeeves so they can have you ask an AI character who looks and talks like a butler named Jeeves? And what if they try to market this to millennials and it's cringy and awful? I can foresee it all now. We don't need more Doctor Who. We need to put Guiji on the Smash and Pass. Smash or Pass Guiji. Which I hope a good time. Bonzi Buddy, no! No, they could also AI Bonzi Buddy. I don't... What kind of future are we leaving our children, people? If we end up going back to the past to resurrect Jeeves and Bonzi Buddy, then we're really just kind of leaving them with a worse scene for everybody. Thank you for the 10 bucks. Okay, wait, hold on. Waluigi is your F. Toad is your M. I think I agree with that one. Your K is Yoshi. Why? I have questions about the first two, but I'm booting up the free Steam demo for Ultra Kill here at the very, very end of my stream with exactly 1 minute left because I could not figure out a fun, reliable way to end this thing unless it were with a tease. And Ultra Kill is one of these, like, 1 to 10 person games that I've been talking about here that I would probably enjoy a whole lot unless it's a lot of hit scan pointing and clicking on bad guys type gameplay. But how I've never played Ultra Kill before. Will I enjoy Ultra Kill or will I find Ultra Kill boring or not? I don't know, but apparently there's a demo on Steam, and wow, mouse sensitivity is very, very high. So is the field of view. That's actually kind of awesome. I didn't have to pay money for this because I don't got money that's not going to debt payments to spend on this. And I don't know. I don't know if I would like Ultra Kill or not. I bet I would, but I don't know. And neither do... What very obvious tutorial message did I miss here? Probably something about bouncing on walls, I bet. Yoink. Doink. Yoink. Oink. Doink. In any case, will I enjoy Ultra Kill or not? Let's find out on another exciting episode of the Super Bunny Hop Sad Stream Productivity Poverty Streams. Or is it Free Stream Friday? Find out on another exciting episode of Free Stream Friday. I need to find out why my computer is rattling.